The night Mara Elliott's life changed began with a knock she almost did not answer. She was sitting on the edge of her bed at 8:30 on a Tuesday, still wearing her work clothes, staring at the wall the way she had been doing most evenings lately, not thinking about anything in particular, just existing in that narrow, careful space she had built for herself over the past 2 years. The knock came twice, quiet and uncertain, and for a moment she considered not moving. She was very good at not moving. She had become, over the course of this particular stretch of her life, extremely skilled at remaining still and waiting for things to pass. Then she heard Petra's voice through the door. "Mara, I know you are in there. I can see your light under the door." She got up. She unlocked the door and Petra Holt came in, with her coat still on, and the look on her face that meant she had come directly from wherever she had been, and had not stopped to plan what she was going to say, which was the way Petra did most things that mattered to her. She had short dark hair and sharp eyes, and the particular energy of someone who had decided a long time ago that being honest was more important than being comfortable. "The Convergence gathering is this Friday," Petra said. She said it the way someone states a fact they have already decided is non-negotiable. "You are coming. I have already told the attendance coordinator that you will be there." Mara stepped back to let her in. "You told them before asking me?" "If I had asked you, you would have said no." Petra came inside and looked around the apartment with the mild, worried attention she always brought to it. The single cup on the drying rack, the half-read book splayed on the table at the same page it had been at last Saturday, the general quietness of a space that had learned to need very little. She turned back to Mara. "You have missed 2 convergences in a row. People have started asking where you are. Let them ask." "Mara." Petra's voice dropped into the register she reserved for real conversations, the one without any edge or performance in it. "I am not asking you to go for their sake. I am asking for yours. You have been pulling back, a little more every month. You leave the archive at 5, you come home, you read until 10, you sleep. You see me on Saturdays if I come to you. That is the entire shape of your life right now." "It is a stable life," Mara said. "It is a safe life," Petra said. "Those are not the same thing, and you know it." Mara looked at the book on the table. She had been on page 47 for 3 weeks. She had read those same pages twice, without taking in what they said, because her mind kept sliding off the words and landing somewhere else, somewhere flat and gray and very familiar. She had not noticed, until Petra said it out loud, how small the shape of her days had become. 2 hours, she said. "I will go for 2 hours, then you bring me home." Petra's expression shifted into something that was almost relief, but trying not to show it. 2 hours. Done. I will drive. She had no idea, standing in that quiet apartment with its single cup and its unread book, what she was agreeing to walk into. Mara was 31 years old. She worked as a records coordinator for the Central Archive of the Northern Territory, which was the kind of job that people at dinner parties described as very important sounding and then immediately changed the subject away from. She organized documents. She cross-referenced. She maintained the systems that kept 4 decades of territorial records accessible and intact. It was precise, demanding work that required a particular kind of mind, organized, thorough, able to hold large amounts of information in clear relation to each other, and she was very good at it. She was also, at the archive, almost entirely invisible, which suited her. She arrived before most of the staff, and left when the work was done, and did not draw attention to herself in any direction. She had not always been invisible. There had been a version of Mara, recent enough that she could still reach back and touch the edges of her, who had been warm and open and quick to laugh, who had had friends she called without planning to, who had walked into rooms and stayed in the center of them rather than positioning herself near the walls and exits, who had believed, in the uncomplicated, pre-tested way that some people believed before life adjusted their thinking, that institutions built to protect people generally did so, and that speaking honestly about harm was enough to set something right. That version of her had filed a grievance 2 years ago against Harlan Grove, a senior delegate from the Western Territory. She had filed it carefully and completely. Dates, locations, exact words, 3 witness names. She had organized the evidence with the same precision she brought to the archive's records, because it was the only way she knew how to do things, and because she had understood, even then, that the quality of the documentation would matter. The grievance had been reviewed by the Western Territory Conduct Office. It had come back to her 6 weeks later marked closed, in an envelope that contained a form letter citing insufficient evidence to proceed and the signature of a deputy reviewer named Aldrich Penn. She had read it once, carefully, set it down, and then gone and been sick in the bathroom of her apartment because her body understood what her mind was still processing, that the system she had believed in had looked at what she had given it and decided to give it back. She had opened a document on her laptop that same evening and written the date at the top and a description of what had happened, in the calm, precise language of someone who knew how to make records. She had locked the document in an encrypted folder that only she could access. She had added to it every time something happened since. She had not told anyone about the document, not Petra, who was her closest friend and who she trusted with almost everything, not her colleagues at the archive, not the 3 counselors she had seen over the 2 years at various intervals, when the weight of it became too dense to carry alone. The document was hers in the way that something can only be yours when it is the single thing you have not given anyone the chance to take from you. She was still keeping it. On Friday evening, Petra arrived at Mara's door in a dark blue coat, car keys in hand, and the determined expression of someone who had already anticipated and planned for every possible objection. "You look pale," Petra said. "Hello," Mara said. "Did you eat today?" "Yes." "What?" "Toast. And soup." She had had the soup at 3:30 because Petra's text from noon had said, "Eat something real, Mara," and she had decided to comply in advance. Petra looked at her. "The soup is new. Progress." She gestured toward the stairs. "Let's go, before you change your mind." The drive to Aldermere Hall took 25 minutes. Petra talked the whole way about the director of Eastern Territory Resources, who was apparently planning to propose a budget restructure that had already generated 3 formal objections before it was even presented, and about her own work at the Territorial Planning Office, which had been busy in the particular grinding way of institutional work that was important and also relentless. Mara listened and responded in the right places and watched the city go by the window, the evening streets going amber-lit and familiar. She was mapping exits, she realized. Even in the car, looking at the city from behind glass, some part of her was noting which turnings led back to her apartment, which routes were direct, how quickly she could get home if she needed to. It was a habit she had developed so gradually that she no longer noticed herself doing it. Petra's words came back, safe, not stable. The distinction, she thought, was sharper than she had wanted to admit. Aldermere Hall was a large, stone-fronted building in the center of the district, the kind of building that had been built by people who understood that authority required a physical presence. It smelled, inside, of old wood and polished stone and the faint, careful trace of something floral that the events team had arranged along every corridor. It held the weight of many previous gatherings, many previous decisions, the particular gravity that important rooms collected over time. It was also, that Friday evening, extremely loud. Petra steered her through the entrance hall with the practiced efficiency of someone who had attended every convergence for 12 consecutive years and knew exactly how these things were organized, who stood where, which conversations were worth joining, and which were territorial performance. People greeted Petra warmly. They looked at Mara with the pleasant, mild blankness reserved for people they vaguely recognized but could not quite place. She preferred not being placed. She was standing at the long windows that overlooked the inner courtyard, holding a glass of sparkling water and watching the room, rather than being in it, when Petra leaned in from the right. "The Alpha King just arrived," Petra said, low. "Main entrance. Do not look like you are looking." Mara looked. He came in from the main door with a quietness that was its own statement. No announcement, no pause for effect. He simply walked in, tall, dressed in plain, dark clothes that were understated by the standard of the room, followed by a security pair and an assistant who was moving quickly to keep pace. His attention moved through the space as he crossed it, the particular quality of awareness that was not performance, but was genuinely everywhere at once. She watched him for perhaps 5 seconds. She looked away. She would not find out until much later that he had already seen her. Caius Wren had become Alpha King at 32, following the sudden death of the previous king, and had spent the 9 years since learning what the role actually was, as opposed to what it appeared to be from outside. What it was, he had come to understand, was an exercise in being the still point, the fixed reference around which other people's competing needs, fears, ambitions, and problems arranged themselves. He had learned to do this well. He had learned to be useful without being absorbed, to listen without taking on the weight of everything he heard, to act with precision in situations that argued for reaction. What he had not learned to do, 9 years in, was stop seeing things. He had a trained, pervasive alertness that had started as a professional necessity and had become simply the way he moved through the world. He noticed patterns. He noticed when someone in a room was doing something that did not match what they appeared to be doing, and standing just inside the Aldermere Hall entrance, moving through the standard 10-minute arrival sequence of greeting the necessary people in the correct order, he noticed a woman standing alone by the long windows, who was doing something he recognized from the inside of his own experience. She was holding herself together. Not obviously, not in a way the room was registering. To anyone else, she would have appeared to be simply standing, holding a glass, watching the gathering. But there was a quality to her stillness that he knew the difference between: the stillness of someone at ease and the stillness of someone managing. Hers was the second kind. It was controlled and practiced, and it had depth, the depth of a habit rather than a mood. She was managing something significant, and she had been managing it for long enough that the management had become automatic. He looked at her for 2 or 3 seconds, which was long enough to note the general picture: late 20s or early 30s, brown hair pulled back, dark eyes moving through the room with the particular efficiency of someone mapping rather than enjoying. Alone, but not awkwardly alone, deliberately alone, in the way of someone who has positioned themselves precisely where they chose. He turned back to the conversation about infrastructure assessments that required his attention. He kept half his attention on her for the next 40 minutes. He was in the middle of a conversation with 2 directors from the Southern Territory when he saw Harlan Grove cross the floor toward her. He knew Grove, had known him for several years, in the way you knew the people who populated the edges of your professional world, present at gatherings, occasional contributor to council sessions, the holder of a delegate role in the Western Territory that carried more prestige than substance. Caius had never found a specific reason to dislike him, but he had also never found a reason to trust him, and those 2 things lived in the same file for him. He watched Grove reach the woman by the window. He could not hear what was said. He did not need to. She handled herself well. Her expression did not change. She responded to whatever he said with the measured, careful efficiency of someone choosing words precisely, and then Grove touched her arm. A brief thing, a moment, and Caius felt the particular, cold shift in his attention that came when something he had been noting abstractly crystallized into something concrete. She did not move when he touched her. She did not flinch or step back. She went still in the specific way of someone who had learned not to react, because reacting cost more than absorbing. That was a thing people learned. It was not learned quickly. Grove moved away. She stood where she was for a moment, and then she looked at the wall. Caius finished the sentence he was in the middle of, made a response that was appropriate and sufficient, and asked Cole, in a low voice, to pull background information on the Convergence support staff first thing in the morning. Cole nodded, as he always did when given something important with no room for questions. Caius looked across the room. The woman was still there, still standing with her glass and her careful face and the enormous, invisible effort of her stillness. He filed her away. He knew he was going to need to know more. Later, after the gathering thinned, and Cole had gone back to the hotel, and the security team had relaxed into their end-of-evening positions, Caius sat alone in one of the quieter corners of the room, with a glass of water, and let himself think. He was good at this, the deliberate, post-event analysis that most people in his position outsourced to committees or reports. He liked thinking for himself. He trusted his own observations more than institutional summaries, which had a way of becoming both too broad and too narrow at the same time, missing the specific texture of what had actually happened. What had happened tonight, specifically, was this. A woman had stood by a wall for 2 hours and held herself together against something, and a man he had never trusted had touched her arm in a room full of people, and the combination of those 2 things had given him a feeling he had learned never to ignore. He messaged Cole, "Please pull full background on Convergence documentation support staff." Anything on file? First thing tomorrow. Cole replied in 3 minutes. We'll have it on your desk by 7:30. Caius set his phone down. He looked at the mostly empty room, the staff clearing glasses, the events team moving quietly through their end-of-night routines, the last few guests gathering coats. He thought about the way she had looked at the wall. He thought about Harlan Grove walking away with his hands in his pockets, completely unbothered. He got into his car and went back to the hotel. He told himself it was probably nothing. He told himself this the way he sometimes told himself things he wanted to believe, with the full awareness that he did not quite believe them. He had been noticing things for 38 years. He had stopped doubting his noticing a long time ago. Across the city, Mara was lying in the dark. She was doing what she always did after an evening that had involved Grove, going through it methodically, incident by incident, assessing the situation. The arm. The words about finding time to talk. The particular way he had said it, pleasant and unrushed, in a room full of people who would not have registered anything wrong with it. She assessed. She arrived at the conclusion she always arrived at, manageable. She had managed this before. She would manage it again. The gathering ended Sunday. He would go back to the Western Territory. She would go back to the archive. The distance between them would reassert itself, the way it always did, and she would have a few months of breathing room before the next council event brought them into the same building. She turned over. She closed her eyes. She lay awake for a long time. At some point in the early hours of Saturday, she got up and opened the document on her laptop and wrote the entry for Friday evening. The date, the time, the location, the exact words she could remember. The arm. She wrote it with the same calm, precise language she had used for every entry before it, and then she locked the folder and closed the laptop and went back to bed. She did not ask herself why she was still doing this, when the grievance had been closed, and there was nothing to report to, and no one to tell. She did not examine the logic of it. She just did it, because it was the only form of record she had left, and because she had decided, a long time ago, that the truth was worth keeping, even when it had no destination. She fell asleep just before 5. On Saturday morning at 7:25, Cole placed a thin folder on Caius's desk. Caius was already at the window with his first coffee, looking at the city starting its morning. He turned, set the coffee down, and picked up the folder. Most of the Convergence documentation staff are standard long-term archive employees, Cole said. No flags on any of them. One addition was made to the roster late, 4 days before the gathering. Mara Elliott, Records Coordinator, Northern Territory Archive. 4 years with the archive. 3 years in Central Record Services before that. He paused. She filed a workplace conduct complaint 2 years ago. The filing body was the Western Territory Conduct Office. The case is listed as closed. Caius turned the folder's first page. Reviewer, he said. Aldrich Penn. Deputy Reviewer. Western Territory Conduct Office. 11 years in the role. Cole's voice was careful and even. Penn attended Grayfield University, graduating in the same year as Delegate Harlan Grove. They are listed as members of the same student society in the university records. Caius read the single paragraph that constituted the closed case record. It was, as these records usually were, information light, in the specific way of documents that had been written to close things, rather than record them. A date, a reference number, a standardized conclusion, and Penn's signature. Pull Penn's full review history, Caius said. Cross-reference every case involving Western Territory delegates in the past 6 years. Already started, Cole said. I have 3 completed so far, all closed. 2 of them involve Grove's office or Grove's staff directly. Caius set the folder down. He stood at the window again with his coffee and looked at the city morning. He was a man who made decisions at the right time and not before, which meant he had a highly developed sense of the difference between the moment to act and the moment to gather more. This was gathering time. He needed the full picture before anything else. But he also needed to talk to her. Not yet. Not today. He needed to know more first, and he needed her to know that what he was doing was not a performance of attention, but a real thing. She had every reason to be careful around powerful men who claimed to be paying attention. He would need to be very precise about how he approached this. What else do we know about her? He said. She is here as standard documentation support, Cole said. She processes incoming session reports, logs, and cross-references the archive records generated during the convergence. She is not connected to any of the council delegations. She has no formal relationship with any of the territorial offices. A pause. She has no disciplinary record, no financial flags, no prior contact with the Alpha King's office. What was the nature of the conduct complaint? Cole's expression was carefully neutral. It is not detailed in the closed record. The closure summary says only insufficient evidence. There are no attached documents, no witness statements, no record of a formal hearing. There should be, Caius said. Yes, Cole said. There should be. They looked at each other for a moment. Keep going on Penn's history, Caius said. I want the complete picture by end of day. Cole left. Caius picked up his coffee and drank it, and thought. He had a formal council session at 9, a bilateral meeting with the Southern Territory Director at 11, and a documentation briefing at 2. He had, at 5 this afternoon, according to Cole's notes, a window in which the second floor of Aldermere Hall would be largely empty. The documentation room was on the second floor. He went to the morning session. He managed the bilateral meeting with the precision it required. He ate lunch at his desk and reviewed Penn's growing case history, which Cole had extended to 5 closed reviews by noon, 3 of which involved Grove's office. At 5:05, he walked to the documentation room on the second floor. He expected it to be empty. Cole had confirmed that staff were dispersing after the afternoon session. He opened the door. She was there. She looked up when he came in, and he caught the half-second of her registering someone unfamiliar and her body doing the automatic, practiced calculation. Who, how close, what position relative to the door, before recognition arrived and the calculation became composed. I apologize, he said. I was told the room would be clear. I am finishing up, she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than he had expected. He stepped inside anyway. He did this not to crowd her, but because leaving immediately would have been its own kind of statement, a performance of polite retreat that he was not interested in. He closed the door behind him, habit, not intention, and looked around the room with its neat stacks and organized tables, and the small window showing the darkening courtyard. You do not need to rush, he said. I just needed a quiet room for a few minutes. This is the quietest room in the building, she said. That is why I came here, he said. He sat in one of the chairs on the far side of the room, well clear of her table. She returned to her screen. The room had the particular quality of quiet that you only found in spaces where people came to do careful work, an organized, thoughtful quiet, different from the empty quiet of rooms nobody used. He let it sit for a moment. Then he said, You were at the gathering last night. Yes, she said. You left early. A slight pause. She continued typing. I had what I needed from the evening. He looked at her profile. The particular way she held herself, straight, controlled, with an economy of movement that spoke of long practice. Do you work for the council? He said. For the Northern Territory Archive. She glanced at him briefly. I am here as documentation support for the convergence. Is that interesting work? Another pause. This one different from the first. Not defensive, more like recalibration, like someone who was used to not being asked. Very, she said. And then, apparently deciding something. Most people think it sounds dull, but records are the memory of everything that has happened. Without them, decisions get changed or denied, commitments evaporate, and no one can prove what was actually agreed. Records keep institutions honest. They are the only thing that keeps institutions honest, in the end. He looked at her. I have not heard someone argue for archival work quite like that before, he said. Most people do not ask, she said. The courtyard outside was going dim. The last of the day's light was leaving the small square of sky visible through the window. I saw you talking to Harlan Grove last night, he said. She stopped typing. The shift was absolute. She did not move. She did not look at him. She sat with her hands on the keyboard, and her face completely, deliberately still, and there was something in that stillness that confirmed, very clearly, everything he had suspected since last night. He introduced himself, she said. He did more than introduce himself, he said quietly. She said nothing. He watched her. He thought about the document Cole had found, the closed file, the standardized letter, the reviewer who had attended university, with the man she had filed against. He thought about 6 years of Penn's history, all going in the same direction. He thought about the particular texture of her stillness right now, which was not the stillness of someone with nothing to say, but the stillness of someone who had learned not to say it. "I am fine," she said. It was so flat, so automatic, so completely absent of the realness that everything else she had said in this conversation had contained. "I did not ask if you were fine," he said. She looked at him then. It was direct and brief, and it was, he thought, the first genuinely unguarded thing she had done since he walked into the room. Just a look, not more than 2 seconds, but something in it was real. Something was actually there, behind all the composure. Then she looked away. He stood up. He had pushed enough for one encounter. "I have taken enough of your time," he said. "What is your name?" "Mara Elliott," she said. He nodded. He placed the name carefully, deliberately, in a place he would not lose it. "Mara Elliott," he said. "Finish your work. The documentation team is the only reason anything that happens in this building stays real." He left. She heard the door close, and she sat very still for several seconds. Then she pressed her fingertips against the surface of the table, and breathed in, breathed out, and went back to her screen. She told herself it was a conversation. She told herself that nothing had been promised, and nothing had been established, and she should not build anything on 10 minutes in a documentation room, because she knew better than to do that. She had learned that. She was not going to undo that lesson now. She was also, against her better judgment, thinking about what he had said. "I did not ask if you were fine." She saved her work. She packed her bag. She walked down the stairs and through the main corridor, and out the front door into the November evening. And she went back to the hotel, and she sat on the edge of her bed in her coat, and thought about what those 6 words had meant. She had been saying, "I am fine," for 2 years. She had said it to counselors and colleagues, and Petra, and every official who had ever asked. She had become so fluent in it that it no longer felt like a choice. It was just what she said when people asked, because the alternative, the actual honest answer, was something she had stopped believing anyone wanted to hear. He had said he had not asked. He had said it plainly, without softness or performance, and then he had stood up and left, which meant he was not fishing for a different answer. He had just noted, cleanly and directly, that the answer she had given was not to the question he had asked. She was not sure what to do with that. She ordered room service. She ate more than she usually did. She opened the document on her laptop and added the day's entry, and then she closed it and tried to read, and found herself still thinking about those 6 words at 11 o'clock when she finally turned out the light. Cole placed the completed case history on the desk at 7 the next morning. 6 cases reviewed by Penn, 6 closures. Of the 6, 4 involved delegates or staff with direct connections to Grove's Western Territory office. 3 of those 4 cases were explicitly about Grove himself, or people under his direct authority. Pattern was a generous word for what this was. It was a system, small and embedded, and functioning exactly as someone had intended it to function. "There is something else," Cole said. He had the careful expression he wore when he had found something significant and was choosing how to present it. "The Northern Territory Archive employment records for Miss Elliott show a performance gap, 3 months, approximately 18 months ago, where she is listed as present, but her output metrics drop significantly. Then they recover." Caius looked at this. "What happened 18 months ago?" he said. "That is approximately 4 months after the conduct complaint was closed," Cole said. They looked at each other. "Here is what I need to know," Caius said. "Is there a legitimate procedural path to reopen this case?" "Yes," Cole said. "Under council conduct protocol, an improperly closed complaint can be formally reopened with the co-signature of 2 council members of director rank or above, and the consent of the original complainant. It would require a finding that the original closure was procedurally invalid, which the Penn-Grove relationship clearly establishes. Who would need to be in the room? 2 directors, the review clerk, Ms. Elliott, with her consent. A pause, and the delegate, who would be formally notified once the reopening was authorized. Grove would know immediately. Yes, Caius thought. Can it be initiated today? It could be initiated by this afternoon, if you have the directors and the complainant's agreement. Cole was watching him, with the particular careful attention he brought to moments when he understood that something significant was being decided. But you do not yet have her agreement. You have not asked her. I know, Caius said. I am going to ask her. He thought for a moment about how the previous afternoon had been accidental. He did not want the next conversation to be accidental. He wanted her to choose it, to walk into it with full information, and he wanted her to have enough time to think before she was in the room with him. Add her name to the morning briefing attendance list, he said. Optional observers. Give her the choice of whether to come. Cole nodded. And if she comes? Then I will talk to her after, he said, in that order. The morning briefing attendance list was circulated at 8. Mara's name appeared on it as an optional observer, a category that existed precisely for situations like this, when someone needed to understand the context of a process before being asked to participate in it. She was in the documentation room when she saw it on her phone. She stood at her desk and looked at her name on the list for a long moment. She thought about the documentation room conversation. She thought about Cole, whom she had identified as the Alpha King's personal assistant, and the particular quality of his professional attention, the way he managed information without appearing to do so. She thought about, I did not ask if you were fine, and the fact that Caius Wren had said it and then left, which meant he was not making a demand or an offer. He was just being honest about what the question had been. She picked up her bag. She went to the briefing. The room held 30 people in a loose arrangement around a central table. She took a seat near the back, near the door, because she was still herself. Caius Wren came in without ceremony, and began without preamble, agenda, schedule, territorial updates. And she sat in the back and took notes without anyone asking her to, because that was what she did, and because it gave her hands something to do. She tried not to look at him directly. She mostly failed. He was presenting a resource distribution update from the Eastern Territory, a technical, administrative segment that required careful attention, when she glanced toward the front of the room and found that his gaze had already settled on her. Brief and precise and entirely clear, not a performance, not an accident. He had looked at her on purpose, in a room of 30 people, for 2 seconds, to let her know that he knew she was there and that this was not an accident. Then he was back to the resource update. She looked at her notes. Her pen was very steady on the page, which surprised her. After the briefing, Cole materialized at her shoulder. The Alpha King would like a word, he said, if you have a few minutes. Yes, she said. They waited. The room cleared. Cole positioned himself near the door with his phone and the practiced invisibility of someone who was professionally present without being intrusive. Caius crossed the room and sat across from her at the table, not at the head of it, not in any position that communicated rank, just across from her like a person having a conversation. I read your grievance filing from 2 years ago, he said. The words were quiet and direct. They landed. She was careful with her face. She had years of practice. It was closed, she said. Incorrectly, he said. The reviewer had a prior personal relationship with the subject of the complaint. That is a disqualifying conflict of interest, under the council's own conduct standards. The closure is invalid, which means the original complaint was never legitimately adjudicated. She looked at him. She thought about the form letter with its insufficient evidence and its standardized language, and its lack of any record that anyone had actually read what she had submitted. She thought about 18 months ago, when the weight of it had caught up with her in a way she had not been able to manage, and what those 3 months had looked like from the inside. I know that, she said. I know you know, he said. There was no pity in it, just recognition, and I believe you have continued documenting since the closure. She was very still. What makes you say that? Because you are a records coordinator, he said. And because everything else you have done in 2 years suggests someone who has not given up, even when giving up would have been the rational response. She looked at her hands on the table. I want to see the complete file, he said. Everything you have documented, on your terms, in whatever format you choose. I want to do this today, so that what happens next can happen before the end of the convergence, with the full council present and accountable. She raised her eyes to his. Why? She said. It came out clean, without the apologetic softening she sometimes applied to direct questions with powerful people. She needed the real answer. He looked at her steadily. Because it should have been done 2 years ago, he said, and because I have the authority to do it now, and I intend to use it. The room was quiet around them. She thought about all the things she had believed, quietly and persistently, while filing entries into a document she had not expected anyone to read. She thought about the particular kind of hope that lives very low and small in a person, below the level of consciousness almost, the kind that does not announce itself, but also does not go out. "I will send you the file this afternoon," she said. He nodded. "Cole will give you the secure channel. No intermediaries. Direct." He stood. "For what it is worth," he said, not looking at her but not looking away either. "The fact that you kept documenting, when every institutional signal you received was telling you it was pointless, that is the only reason any of this is possible. The record exists because you kept it." He left. Cole came in with a slim, encrypted tablet, showed her the channel in 3 minutes, and left her to it. Mara sat with the tablet in her hands and breathed for a moment. Just breathed. Then she opened the laptop, unlocked the folder she had been keeping for 2 years, and began. It took 40 minutes to transfer everything. The file was larger than she had fully reckoned with, not in size exactly, but in duration. 2 years and 2 months of careful, dated entries, organized chronologically with a cross-reference index she had built out of habit, because it was how she organized everything. Reading back through the earliest entries while she transferred them was strange. She had written them in the immediate aftermath of things, which meant they had a closeness, a specific, lived quality, that the later entries did not have, the later ones having been written from a slightly more managed distance. She wrote the summary at the front last. She had been composing it, she realized, for a long time. It came out in 8 minutes, clear and precise and complete. She submitted the file. She closed the tablet. She put it face down on the table and went back to her documentation work, because the afternoon logs needed completing, and the second delivery was due at 3, and because small and manageable was the right size of task for the next hour. She was halfway through the delivery when Grove came to the door. She felt it before the door opened. She had learned his approach, the pace of his footsteps in the corridor, slightly slower than most people, with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never had to move urgently in his life. She had been hearing those footsteps for 2 years in various buildings. She knew them. She set her face before the door moved. He came in without knocking. He looked around the room with his usual easy assessment, cataloging, approving, deciding, and then turned his gaze to her with those pale gray eyes. "You attended the morning briefing," he said. "I was on the list," she said. "As an optional observer." He said it with a mild emphasis that conveyed what he thought of the classification. "I was not aware that documentation staff attended the Alpha King's morning briefings. I was not aware that my schedule required your awareness," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger, he was too controlled for visible anger, but a slight rearrangement of the surface, a tightening at the edges. "I understand that Cole spoke to you after the session," he said. "Cole is the Alpha King's assistant," she said. "He manages documentation requests. It is a routine function." He came further into the room. She stayed where she was. "Mara," he said, and the use of her name in that particular tone, familiar, authoritative, slightly proprietary, was something she had been dealing with for 2 years. She had learned not to respond to it visibly. "I want to be very clear with you about the position you are in. You are documentation support staff at a 2-day event. In 2 days, everyone here returns to their territories. The Alpha King's office returns to its business. The council disperses." He looked at her steadily. "And then, it is exactly the way it was. You understand that?" She looked at him. She thought about the file she had just sent. She thought about 2 years of entries, organized and complete, sitting now on a secure server that only one person had access to. She thought about Caius Wren saying, "I intend to use it," with the specific flatness of someone who was not making a promise for effect but stating a fact.
"I understand perfectly,"
she said.
"I hope so,"
he said.
"because I would hate for you to make the same mistake twice."
He let that sit, watching her face for a response she was not going to give. "I have colleagues on the Northern Territory Archive hiring committees. I want you to remember that." She looked at him. "I will remember it," she said. He left. The door closed. She picked up the tablet, unlocked it, and added the entry. Date, time. His exact words about the hiring committees. The way he had said mistake twice, with its particular weight. She tagged it and filed it at the end of the document. Then she finished the afternoon delivery. Cole appeared at 5. The Alpha King has received the file and reviewed the summary, he said. He will read the full record this evening. He will contact you through the tablet before 9. He paused. He wanted me to tell you that it is not going to be the way it was before. She looked at Cole. His face was professionally still, but his eyes carried the message behind the message. That this was not a reassurance offered as a courtesy. It was a statement of intent. All right, she said. That evening she met Nina Archer at the bar, 2 streets from the hall. Nina, who had appeared in the staff dining room on Saturday, with a tray too full to be reasonable, and who had become, in 2 days, one of those people you had not expected, and could not now imagine not having. They talked for an hour about things that had nothing to do with any of this, and it was exactly what she needed. She was back at the hotel at 8:30 when the tablet buzzed. A request for a video call. She sat with it in her hands for a moment. Then she accepted. He was at a desk in his hotel suite, a lamp to one side, the room behind him in shadow. He looked tired in the way that had nothing to do with weakness, and everything to do with having been carrying something heavy for a long time. I read it, he said. No lead-in, no frame, just, I read it. All of it? She said. All of it, he said, including today's entry. She nodded. How long have you been doing this alone? He said. She thought about it. It was simpler than it seemed. Since the first entry, she said. I did not know I was building a document at first. I just needed there to be a record, even if it lived on my laptop and no one ever saw it, so that I knew the things that happened to me had been written down. I understand that, he said. She believed him. She believed it completely, which surprised her. What happens next will require you to stand before the full council, he said. I want to be honest about what that means. This cannot be resolved through administrative channels or quiet process. It has to be done openly, with the council present, so that it is part of the official record and cannot be buried again. She looked at the screen. She thought about all the things she had been afraid of. She had been afraid for 2 years, not of Grove specifically, but of the particular, ambient fear of having something taken from you again, when you had finally mustered the courage to reach for it. She had spent 2 years keeping the document, and not sending it to anyone, and she had told herself it was because there was no one to send it to. She thought now that perhaps she had been waiting for the right person to send it to. I will stand before the council, she said. Something shifted in his face that she could feel across the distance of the call. Grove will know it is happening before it happens, he said. He has too many connections in this building. When he realizes the process has been initiated, he will try to reach you. He may threaten you, or he may try to offer you something to stop. I need to know if either happens. He came today, she said. He mentioned the Northern Territory Archive hiring committees. Caius was very still. I added it to the document, she said. Good, he said, and then, for the rest of the convergence, I want Cole with you in the building, whenever you are moving between floors or offices. Do not go anywhere alone. I can manage, she started. I know you can, he said. You have been managing alone for 2 years. I am asking you to let someone else stand in the corridor for a change, that is all. She was quiet for a moment. All right, she said. Good night, Mara Elliott, he said. Good night, she said. The screen went dark. She sat in her hotel room for a while, not doing anything in particular. She ate the rest of the soup she had ordered, which had gone cold but was still good. She sat with the tablet in her lap and the dark window beside her and the city outside, going about its ordinary night. She thought, something has started now. A real thing. Not just a document on a locked laptop. Not just an entry added to a record that lived only in the dark. A real process, with signatures and council oversight, and a formal path forward. She was frightened. She was also, and this was the thing she turned over and over in the quiet of the room, more clear-headed than she had been in 2 years. Clear in the way that came from having made a decision you had been approaching for a long time without quite reaching. Clear in the way of someone who had been holding a door half closed for 2 years, and had finally opened it all the way. She was going to be frightened and clear. That seemed right. She turned out the light. Cole met her at the building entrance the next morning at 8, with 2 coffees, and the efficient composure that she was beginning to rely on, in the particular way you relied on people who did what they said, without making a production of it. Good morning, he said. "Good morning," she said. He handed her a coffee. She took it. They walked in together. The first thing she saw when she reached the second floor was the change in the atmosphere of the building. Nothing she could have pointed to precisely. No raised voices, no visible confrontation. But the texture of it had shifted. There was a particular tension in the quality of movement around the Western Territory offices, a slight increase in the number of people moving purposefully through corridors that were usually quiet in the morning. She had been reading buildings for 2 years. She read this one. "He was notified?" she said to Cole. "At 8:10, Cole said. She nodded. Grove appeared at the end of the corridor at 9:20. He was composed. He was managing his composure the way he managed everything, from the outside in, surface first, the internal adjustments invisible but present if you knew to look. He was accompanied by 2 of his own staff, which told her he understood that this was serious enough to require witnesses, or the appearance of them. He looked at Cole. Cole looked at him with the particular, impenetrable pleasantness of someone who had been trained for exactly this interaction. "I need to speak with Miss Elliott," Grove said. "Miss Elliott is currently completing the morning documentation cycle," Cole said. "She is unavailable until the formal review session this afternoon. It is about the review session that I need to speak with her. The appropriate channel for that is the council review process, which you have been notified of," Cole said. His voice was perfectly even, not cold, not apologetic, just precise. Grove's eyes moved past Cole to the documentation room door, where Mara was standing slightly to the side of the window, not quite visible. She had not moved back when he arrived. She had stayed and watched. "I want to make something clear to her," Grove said. "Any communication with Miss Elliott regarding the formal review process should be directed to the council review clerk," Cole said. "This corridor is restricted to documentation staff during active working hours." There was a moment. It was a long moment, the kind that contained a reckoning, the moment where someone understood that the ground had changed and was calculating what to do with that understanding. Grove turned and walked away. His staff followed. Mara opened the documentation room door. "Thank you," she said. "He will try another route," Cole said, not alarming her, informing her. "Not through me directly, through someone he believes you trust, someone who appears neutral. Be aware of that." "Nina," she said immediately. Then she looked at Cole. "Not that I do not trust Nina. I trust Nina completely. But he will try to reach me through her, because she is the one person in this building I have actually talked to." Cole nodded. "I would advise telling her." She already had her phone out. Nina arrived at the courtyard 20 minutes later, with 2 cups of tea, and the look of someone who had cleared her schedule, and was fully present for whatever this was. Mara told her. She told her clearly, and without embellishment, the grievance, the closure, the document she had kept, what had been initiated this morning, what was likely to happen this afternoon. She told her about Grove appearing at the documentation room door with his 2 staff members, and Cole's assessment that he would try another route. Nina listened. She wrapped both hands around her cup and listened without interrupting, which was, for Nina, an act of some discipline. When Mara finished, Nina was quiet for a moment. "His staff came to Halford's office this morning," she said. Mara looked at her. "One of them, I do not know his name, came in at 9 to ask if Director Halford had any concerns about the conduct review process, and whether he would be open to a conversation about procedural consistency across territorial standards." Nina's expression was very dry. Halford told him that procedural consistency was entirely the council's domain, and he was welcome to raise his concerns through the formal session. "How much does Halford know?" Mara said. "Not the specifics," Nina said. "But Halford has been on this council for 20 years. He can smell a pressure play." She looked at Mara directly. "What do you need from me?"
"Nothing," Mara said. "And also, if Grove or anyone from his office approaches you about me, tell me." "Of course," Nina said.
She paused. "I am also going to mention, completely separately, and at my own initiative, and not because you asked, that Director Cavell's assistant should probably know that Grove's staff are making what appear to be informal lobbying visits to other territorial offices this morning." She tilted her head. "As a general professional observation." Mara looked at her. "That would be very helpful," she said. Nina nodded, satisfied. She drank her tea. "You are going to be all right," she said. I am not saying that to make you feel better. I am saying it because it is true. They sat in the cold courtyard for 10 minutes more. It was exactly the right amount of time. At 1:30, the preparation room adjacent to the council chamber. Mara sat in the chair nearest the window with her folder on the table and a glass of water she was not drinking, and the tight, particular feeling in her chest that was not quite fear and not quite anticipation, but had the qualities of both. She could hear, through the wall, the gradual filling of the chamber, the sound of people taking seats, the low murmur of preparation, the specific energy of an institution, gearing itself towards something formal. The door opened, and Caius came in alone. She had not expected that. She had expected Cole, with a procedural update. She had expected the review clerk with a timing confirmation. She had not expected him, alone, with his jacket on and no attendant, and the expression of someone who had set aside whatever was behind it for the purpose of this moment. He sat down across from her. "How are you?" he said. "Tight," she said. She had stopped editing her answers to him. She was not sure when that had happened. "That is the correct feeling," he said. "This is a large thing." "Yes." He looked at her. "You do not have to speak unless you choose to. The review clerk will present the documentation. The directors will establish the procedural grounds. You only add your voice when you want to." "I know how council reviews work," she said. "I know you do," he said. There was no correction in it. "I wanted to say it anyway. Because 2 years ago, no one said anything to you before you walked into a room where the result had already been decided. I did not want today to feel like that." She looked at him for a long moment. "It does not feel like that," she said. He nodded. The room was quiet. Through the wall, the chamber continued its preparations. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes. The first night, at the gathering, why did you notice me? There were 300 people in that room. Most of them were considerably more important than a records coordinator from the Northern Territory." He was quiet for a moment, not calculating the answer. She was beginning to understand the difference between his silences. He was just thinking. "Because everyone else in the room was doing something," he said. "Performing, networking, managing an impression, advancing something. You were the only person who was working, holding something in place that required genuine effort." He looked at her directly. "That looks different, when you know what to look for. It looks like someone fighting a battle that no one around them knows is happening." She was quiet. "I have been fighting it for 2 years, she said. "I know," he said. "That is over now." Before she could respond to that, Cole knocked once and opened the door. "They are ready." Mara stood. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her folder, her own copy, not the one already submitted, because she had always believed in having a copy. "Ready?" Caius said. "Yes," she said. And she was. The council chamber was a large, formal room, with high ceilings and long windows along one side, and the settled weight of a space that had absorbed many significant things over many years. It was full. Directors, delegates, council members, assistants, the review clerk at her side table, and in the gallery above, a row of observers who included, she noticed, Nina, sitting beside Director Cavell's assistant with a carefully neutral expression. Grove was at the delegate table with his legal counsel. He looked at her once when she entered. His face was composed. The smoothness she had known for 2 years was intact, but she could see, very clearly, that it was costing him something now. The effort was visible in the way the effort had never been visible before. She walked to her designated chair and sat down. Director Cavell presented the procedural finding. 11 minutes, clear and precise. The Pengrove relationship, the disqualifying conflict, the standard for procedural invalidity under Section 31 of the Council's Conduct Code. He used no words he did not need. Director Holt presented the documentation index. She described it without embellishment. 2 years and 2 months of contemporaneous records, 64 individual entries, 12 categories of incident, a summary written by the complainant. The clerk addressed Mara. "Ms. Elliott, you are invited to speak to the substance of your original complaint." Mara set her folder on the table. She looked at the room. She looked at the faces, careful, wary, professional. Some genuinely attentive, and some performing attentiveness. The full range of human response to something real being asked of an institution. She looked at Grove's composed face and his counsel's prepared folder. She looked for one moment at Caius at the head of the chamber table. He was looking back at her, not encouraging, not signaling, just steady, just present. She turned to the room. She spoke for 11 minutes. She spoke without rushing and without faltering and without looking at her notes, because everything she was saying lived inside her and had lived there for 2 years. She named dates and places and exact words, the way you named things when you had been keeping a record of them. She described what had happened, clearly, directly, without euphemism and without embellishment, because the facts were enough. She described what had happened when she had tried to report it, and what the form letter had said, and what she had done afterward. She said, "I kept writing, because I believed the truth was worth keeping, even without a destination. I believed that the record would matter. I believed that eventually, someone would read it." She said, "I am glad I was right." The room was quiet while she spoke. When she finished, she folded her hands on the table and waited. Grove's counsel submitted a response. The careful reframing, the procedural references, the suggestion that the complainant's account was subjective and the timeline was disputed. It was exactly what she had predicted, word for word, argument by argument. She had written this response down in advance in the document, and it had appeared, here, in this room, precisely as she had said it would. Director Holt asked 2 questions about the pen review. Both responses were inadequate. Director Cavell asked about a specific date and location. The counsel's answer did not match the documented record. Caius said nothing. He was the Alpha King. The process had his weight behind it without him saying a word. The clerk called a recess for deliberation at 4:15. Mara walked out into the corridor. She stood against the wall and breathed. Cole appeared. "You were excellent," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. And she was. She was not managing the answer. She was not saying it by rote. She was all right. In the middle of a corridor of a building, where something enormous was being decided, and the rightness of it was real, and specific, and hers. She was all right. The deliberation took 1 hour and 38 minutes. Mara spent it in the courtyard with Nina, who had appeared from the gallery with 2 cups of tea, and had simply sat down beside her without asking. They talked, about nothing significant, Nina's brother and his engineering problems, the quality of the food in the Aldermere Hall staff dining room compared with the bar 2 streets over, whether the rose bushes in the courtyard would survive the winter. They talked about things that were far away from the council chamber and its deliberation, and it helped in exactly the way that things which are far away help when you are too close to something to see it clearly. At one point, Nina said, "The room was very quiet when you spoke." Mara looked at her. "I have attended a lot of council sessions," Nina said. "People do not go that quiet unless something is real." Mara looked at the courtyard stones. "Director Cavell's assistant told me," Nina continued, "that the documentation you submitted is being described by the review panel as the clearest contemporaneous record they have reviewed in 6 years. "It should be," Mara said. "I am a records coordinator. That is what I do." Nina looked at her. "You are significantly more than that," she said. Her phone buzzed. Cole coming back in. She stood. The chamber had refilled. The review panel was in place. Grove was at his table, composed, controlled, the effort of both now almost visibly consuming him. She sat down. The clerk stood. In the matter of the complaint filed by Mara Elliott against Delegate Harlan Grove of the Western Territory, this counsel finds as follows. The room was absolutely still. The original closure, issued by reviewer Aldrich Penn of the Western Territory Conduct Office, is found to have been procedurally invalid due to a disqualifying prior relationship between the reviewer and the subject of the complaint. The closure is hereby voided, and the original complaint is formally adjudicated under the terms of this review. Mara's hands were folded on the table. On the substance of the complaint, the council finds by majority vote that the pattern of conduct described by the complainant is credible and well supported by contemporaneous documentation, and constitutes a violation of the Territorial Conduct Code under Sections 7, 14, and 22. She breathed in, very slowly. Delegate Harlan Grove is formally censured. His delegate credentials across all 5 territories are suspended, pending review, by the Joint Conduct Authority. The Council further recommends the referral of reviewer Aldrich Penn to the Independent Oversight Office for review of his complete case history. The clerk looked up. This concludes the formal review. The room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the weight of what had just happened moved through it in the particular, unmistakable way of something that could not be undone. Mara sat with her hands folded on the table. She did not look at Grove. She looked at the far wall, at the long windows and the late afternoon light coming through them in pale, golden lines, and she thought about 2 years of entries in a locked folder on a laptop in a small apartment, and the particular stubborn hope that had kept her writing them. It had not been wrong to keep writing. It had not been wrong to believe. Outside in the corridor, Cole was waiting. "The Alpha King asked me to give you this," he said, and held out a small piece of paper, folded once. She took it, unfolded it. 4 words. "Well done, Mara Elliott." She folded it again. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, where she would carry it for 3 weeks before she finally put it somewhere safe. "Tell him thank you," she said. "I will," Cole said. The post-session debrief with Holt and Cavell was practical and necessary, and she attended it with full attention. There would be follow-up documentation requests. The Joint Conduct Authority review would take time. She might be called again. There was a formal victim support channel she had not known existed, which Cavell's assistant wrote down for her on a card. She left the building at 7:15. She stood on the front steps of Aldermere Hall in the cold evening air and looked at the street. Just a street, just the city going about its ordinary business. Nina was at the bottom of the steps with a bag from the restaurant 2 streets over. "Come," Nina said. "Hot food. Now." Mara went down the steps. The last formal session of the Convergence ran from 9 to noon on Sunday. Mara attended as documentation support, sitting in the back of the chamber with her laptop and her organized files, doing the work she had come here to do. It was the standard close-of-gathering session. Resource agreements, follow-up schedules, the careful language of institutional process completing its cycle. Grove's seat was empty. The fact of the empty seat moved through the room like a current, registered, noted, filed, without anyone commenting on it. She watched it move, and said nothing, and typed her logs with the same precise attention she brought to everything. After the session, she packed the documentation room cleanly. She labeled the transport boxes. She completed the closing notifications to the Northern Territory Archive. She did everything properly, and then she put on her coat, and Cole was there at the door. "He would like to speak with you before you go," Cole said. "Yes," she said. She found him in the small office on the 2nd floor, mostly cleared of the week's work. He was standing at the window when she came in, and he turned immediately, which told her he had been listening for her. "How are you?" he said. "Better than better," she said. "I do not have the right word yet." "Take your time finding it," he said. She stepped further into the room. She looked at the packed boxes, the bare desk, the temporary space returning to emptiness. "You leave this afternoon." "Northern Territory Council session Monday," he said. "Cole has the schedule." There was a pause. It was a good pause, the kind that was not empty, but was simply unhurried. "I want to ask you something," he said. "All right." "The document you kept for 2 years," he said. "You kept adding to it, even when you had no clear path for using it. What made you keep going?" She thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because it was true," she said. "And the truth needed a record, even if the record existed only so I could know it existed. So I could know the things that had happened to me were real and documented, and not something I was misremembering or making worse than they were." She paused. "And underneath all of that, somewhere very quiet, I believed that eventually someone would read it. I did not know who. I did not know how. But I believed it. Someone read it," he said. "Yes," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I would like to stay in contact," he said. "Not officially. Just as someone who knows what you did here, and wants to know how things go for you." She looked at him. She thought about the week, about the man who had said, "I did not ask if you were fine," and had meant it. About the conversation in the preparation room, about the note in her jacket pocket. She thought about what it meant to be seen clearly by someone who did not look away. "I would like that too," she said. He nodded. Something moved in his face, the thing that sometimes came before a smile. Then I will be in contact, he said. She turned to go. At the door, she stopped. For what it is worth, she said. You used your authority the way it should be used. You did not have to. A lot of people in your position would have found excellent reasons not to. She paused. I wanted to say that. She left. In the entrance hall, Petra was waiting with her car keys, and the expression of someone who had been following this week from a very careful distance, and had about 20 questions she was choosing not to ask all at once. Ready? Petra said. Yes, Mara said. Outside, the city was pale and clear, the kind of Sunday that came after a week of rain. Mara stood on the steps for one moment, and breathed in the cold air, and looked at the street. In the car, Petra waited until they were moving, before she said, carefully, Do you want to tell me? Yes, Mara said. She told her everything. Petra listened the whole way home without interrupting. When Mara finished, Petra was quiet for a moment. You kept that document for 2 years, she said, and did not tell me. I needed it to be mine first, Mara said, until it could be something else. Petra put her hand on Mara's for a moment, then put it back on the wheel. They drove the rest of the way in a silence that was not uncomfortable. That was, in fact, the most comfortable kind of silence, the kind between people who understood each other well enough not to need to fill it. Outside Mara's building, Petra said, Are you all right? Actually. Mara thought about it. I am getting there, she said. I can feel that I am getting there. Petra nodded. Good, she said. That is enough. Mara went up to her apartment. She took off her coat and her jacket. She made tea. She sat at her kitchen table in the quiet of a Sunday evening, with both hands around the cup, and looked at the window. On the counter, the single cup on the drying rack. On the table, the book opened to page 47. She picked up the book. She read from page 47, and she actually read it this time. She read to page 63 before she put it down, because she was tired, not because her mind had slid away from it. She went to bed. She slept before 10 o'clock, which had not happened in longer than she could easily remember. 3 weeks after the convergence, an email arrived from a council address she had not seen before. The body was not formal. It said, I hear the Northern Territory has good records. She was at her desk at the archive when she read it. The morning was gray, and her tea was going cold, and she read it twice. She typed, The best in 5 territories. The coordinator is exceptional. The reply came in 4 minutes. I have been told that about her. She set her phone down and looked at her screen for a moment. Then she picked it up. She typed, I would like to have dinner. Not a tour of anything. Just dinner, if that is something you would want. She put the phone down. She did not look at it for 4 minutes. His reply took 30 seconds. It said, I have been wondering when you would suggest that. Yes, absolutely yes. She put the phone in her bag. She went back to her document cross-references. She worked through the morning with the steady, particular satisfaction of someone who is good at what they do, and the archive was warm around her, and she was smiling. The real kind. The kind that came without her having to think about it. The dinner was at a small restaurant on the east side of the city that Mara had been to twice before, and liked for its quiet and its good bread, and its complete absence of anyone she would need to be professional around. She arrived first, which she had planned. She sat at the corner table. She ordered water. She looked at the menu she already knew. She told herself to stop straightening the napkin. He arrived 6 minutes after her. Cole had walked him in, and handed something off at the door, and was gone. And then he was crossing the restaurant in his plain dark clothes, looking exactly like a person coming to dinner, and nothing else. He sat down across from her. You chose a good table, he said. I always choose corner tables, she said. So do I, he said. They looked at each other for a moment. There was something in the air between them that was not awkward. Awareness, rather, of standing at a threshold both of them had been moving toward, without quite naming. Both of them present, both of them choosing this. Are you nervous? He said. Are you? She said. He paused. Yes, he said. She exhaled. Just slightly. Then we are even, she said. They ordered. They talked. For the first time, with no context that required them to be professional or procedural. They just talked. He told her about the town in the Southern Territory where he had grown up. Small, inland, the kind of place you left at 18 and missed in unexpected ways afterward. She told him about the Northern Territory town where she had grown up, larger, near the coast, which she had not been back to in 4 years, for reasons she did not fully explain, and which he did not push. They talked about books. He read history. She read everything, and had specific, particular opinions about it, and there was a long conversation about a novel they had both read in the same year, that ended with both of them surprised. They talked about what they found difficult. He said, being the still point. Always being the still point, for everyone, without having one yourself. She said, trusting the things she could not control to resolve correctly. He looked at her when she said that. You trusted the process this week, he said. I trusted you, she said. That is different. Is it? He said. She thought about it. Maybe not, she said. The bread was warm, and the food was good, and the evening moved, with the unhurried pace of a dinner that neither person was in a hurry to finish. At some point he said, what do you want? Not from any process or institution, for yourself. She thought about it. I want to not be braced all the time, she said. I want to walk into rooms without counting the exits. I want to eat proper meals and sleep properly, and do work that matters. I want people in my life who see me clearly. She paused. And I would like a dog. I have been wanting a dog for about 3 years, and telling myself I was not stable enough to have one. He looked at her. Are you stable enough now? He said. Yes, she said. I think so. He smiled. The real kind, the kind she had seen for the first time in the archives reading room, and had been quietly hoping to see again. It changed his face completely. Get the dog, he said. She smiled back. It was, she thought, one of the better evenings of her recent life. Possibly longer. He walked her out when the dinner ended, and they stood on the street in the November cold and looked at the city going about its evening. I would like to do this again, he said. So would I, she said. They said goodnight. She walked home with her hands in her pockets and her chin up, not braced, not counting anything. Just a person walking home through an ordinary city on an ordinary night, toward an apartment that was going to have a dog in it by December. She let herself feel that. She let herself feel all of it. The dog arrived on a Thursday in December. He was rust-colored and medium-sized, and had the large, slightly worried ears of an animal who had learned to pay careful attention to the world, and was not yet sure the world deserved it. The rescue shelter estimated him at approximately 2 years old. He had been there for 4 months. Mara named him Birch, which surprised the shelter staff, who had been expecting something more conventional, and which felt immediately and absolutely right to her. He was, from the first evening, precisely the right size and weight of presence for her apartment. He sat beside her on the sofa in a way that suggested he had decided this was simply the correct place for him to be, and he walked with her to the archive in the mornings. Dogs were permitted in the staff entrance, and he filled the space that had been very carefully empty for 2 years, with a warmth that she had not quite understood she was missing until it arrived. She sent a photo to Caius the first evening. His reply, excellent ears. She sent back, he takes them very seriously. His reply, as he should. She put her phone down and sat on the floor of her living room with Birch's chin in her lap and thought about what it meant that this was her life now. A dog, a dinner on the calendar for next week, Nina calling every few days from wherever the Eastern Territory had sent her, Petra coming Saturday, with the particular combination of food and conversation that she had begun to recognize as her way of rebuilding things that had been pulled apart. A process moving forward, with official case numbers and institutional oversight, and the full authority of the council behind it. She thought about the document she had kept for 2 years. She had not deleted it. She had moved it from the locked folder to a clearly labeled, accessible one, because it was part of the record of what had happened, and records deserved proper organization. She did not read it often. It was not the thing she thought about most when she thought about the past 2 years. What she thought about was the 12 minutes in the briefing room that morning, with Holt and Cavell, and the formal consent she had given to reopen the complaint. She thought about 11 minutes, standing in the council chamber. She thought about 4 words on a piece of paper in her jacket pocket. Birch looked up at her with his large, attentive eyes. Good, she told him, which was not quite a sentence, but was exactly what she meant. Everything is good. This is good. We are going to be fine. She meant it. The Joint Conduct Authority review of Harlan Grove concluded 4 months and 19 days after the convergence. Mara knew the exact duration because she had counted, not obsessively. She had work and Birch and the ongoing project of living her life properly, but with the steady attention of someone who understood that watching a process carefully was a way of honoring what had gone into starting it. She received formal correspondence at each stage. Every letter was read carefully and filed in the new document she had created, a different kind of document from the one she had kept for 2 years, organized not around harm but around resolution, around the things that had been fixed and how. The day the finding arrived, she was at lunch. She opened the email. She read it. She read it again. Grove's delegate credentials were permanently revoked. The Western Territory Council had issued its own formal censure. Penn had been removed from the Conduct Office, and his full case history referred to the Independent Oversight Office. 6 additional cases he had reviewed were flagged for reinvestigation. At the end of the formal finding, a paragraph addressed to her specifically. The documentation provided by Miss Mara Elliott was described by the review panel as among the most thoroughly maintained contemporaneous records the authority has received. The consistency and precision of this documentation was central to the outcome of this case. She set her phone down. She ate the rest of her lunch. Nina called at 2. I heard. How are you? Good, Mara said. Really, actually good. Send the conduct protocol proposal to me as well, Nina said. Halford is on the oversight committee. I know how to get it in front of him. I have already submitted it formally, Mara said. Then I will follow it up through the side entrance, Nina said. That is how things actually move in these institutions. Mara thought about how many things had moved in the past 4 months, because the right people had used what they had in exactly the right way. Thank you, she said. You keep thanking me, Nina said. I keep not needing it. She sent Caius a message. The finding was issued today. I wanted to tell you directly. His reply came in 6 minutes. He had been watching for it. She was sure of that. It said, I know. I have been waiting all morning. Well done, Mara Elliott. She looked at those 4 words. She typed, You keep saying that. His reply, because it keeps being true. She put her phone in her bag. She had a cross-reference to finish before end of day, and 2 delivery logs to close. She finished them properly, carefully, with the same thoroughness she brought to all of it. Outside her window, the afternoon was going blue, and the city was moving through its ordinary business, and Birch was asleep under her desk, which was where he slept every afternoon. She was smiling while she worked. The real kind. The kind she had stopped having to think about. In the spring, the council formally adopted the Elliott Protocol. It was not called that officially. Officially, it was the Territorial Conduct Review Standards Amendment, which was the name it had been given when it moved through the formal adoption process in the council's spring session. But Director Holt had used the name in a briefing 2 months earlier, and it had spread through the council staff the way informal names for important things always spread, quickly, and then permanently. The protocol established independent reviewers for all conduct complaints. It required cross-territorial oversight for cases involving delegates. It mandated full disclosure of any prior relationship between a reviewer and the subject of a complaint. It created a formal complainant liaison role within the council's conduct office so that the people who filed complaints had a direct and accountable point of contact throughout any review process. It addressed, specifically and precisely, every gap that the original handling of Mara's complaint had exposed. She attended the formal adoption session as an observer, sitting in the public gallery above the main chamber, watching the vote with the same careful attention she brought to everything. When it passed, she wrote the date and the vote count and the full protocol title in the document she had started, the resolution document, the one that tracked what had been fixed. She had always believed in keeping records of the good things, as well as the necessary ones. Afterward, in the corridor outside the council building, Cole was waiting with 2 coffees. Congratulations, he said. The protocol committee did the work, she said. The protocol committee had your proposal and your case, Cole said. That is not the same as the committee doing the work. She drank the coffee. It was exactly right. Is he inside? She said. Post-session briefing, Cole said. 20 minutes or so. She stood in the spring sunlight outside the council building and looked at the street. Birch was at the archive with her colleague Diane, who had started walking him on lunch breaks for reasons she described as entirely selfish. The afternoon was warm and pale and completely ordinary. 22 minutes later, Caius came out. He saw her immediately. He always saw her immediately, which she had long since stopped being unsettled by and had started finding quietly and completely remarkable. He came down the steps. They stood in the spring morning, both with coffee, on an ordinary street, in the middle of an ordinary day that contained, embedded inside its ordinariness, something they had built together that was going to outlast both of them. "Well done," he said. "You keep saying that," she said. "You keep doing things worth saying it about," he said. She looked at him. She thought about a woman who had once stood at the edges of rooms and counted exits, and held herself very still against the weight of things she had not been able to put down. She thought about a locked folder and 64 entries, and the stubborn, quiet belief that records mattered. She thought about how much had changed. She thought about how she was still, in all the ways that mattered, exactly herself. "Lunch?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked down the street together in the spring light, not performing anything, not managing anything. Two people who knew each other well enough now to walk in comfortable silence, or to talk, or to do both, depending on what the moment asked for. Birch was at the archive. The protocol was on the official record. The document was open and clearly labeled. Everything was where it was supposed to be. There were things Mara had not said out loud in a long time. Not because she had forgotten them, and not because they had lost their shape or their weight. If anything, they had grown more precise over 2 years of keeping records. The way that writing something down again and again gave it an exactness that memory alone did not preserve. She knew every incident in the document the way she knew the archive systems she managed, completely, from the inside, with the ability to navigate to any part of it in seconds. What she had not done was say any of it out loud to someone who was listening. That changed the week of the convergence, in small and then larger increments, the way things changed when they had been building toward change for a long time, and then met the right conditions. The first real conversation had been in the documentation room at 5 in the afternoon, with a man who had walked in unexpectedly, and stayed and said, "I did not ask if you were fine." She had turned that sentence over in her mind every day since, not obsessively. She was not prone to obsession. She was prone to careful, repeated examination, but with the particular attention she gave to things that had changed the shape of something. That sentence had changed the shape of something. She thought about it in the mornings at the archive, when she was doing the first hour of cross-referencing before the rest of the staff arrived, and the building was quiet, and the work had the particular, focused quality of things done without witness. She thought about it when she was walking Birch in the evenings, which had become the part of her day she looked forward to most, the cool air, the empty street, the uncomplicated companionship of an animal who asked nothing complicated of her. She thought about it in the way that said, that sentence mattered. That sentence was the beginning of something. She was not wrong. 3 weeks after the convergence, Caius had emailed. Then they had called twice. Then he had come to the Northern Territory for the resource audit and spent 2 hours in the archive reading room, asking her questions about documentation systems that she had answered with real enthusiasm, because the questions were good, and because she had not talked about her work to someone who was genuinely interested in a long time. He had asked what she wanted for herself, and she had said a dog and the ability to stop bracing, and he had said get the dog, without any of the hesitation that people sometimes brought to practical suggestions, the hesitation that meant they were waiting for you to prove you were stable enough for the thing you wanted. He had not waited for her to prove it. He had just said, get the dog. So she had gotten the dog. Birch, for his part, had settled into her life with a confidence that she found both admirable and instructive. He was not a dog who waited to feel safe. He had arrived at her apartment, assessed the situation, selected his spot on the sofa, and proceeded to occupy his life, as though he had always been here, and always planned to be. She thought about this sometimes, the way he had simply decided that this was home, and started living as though it were. She was trying to learn that. She was making progress. In the weeks between the convergence and the formal conduct review conclusion, She had begun to notice things returning to her that she had not known were missing. She slept properly. Not just the flat, exhausted sleep of someone who had run out of resources, but actual rest, the kind that arrived easily and left her clear in the morning. She ate at mealtimes. She read, and the words went in and stayed, and she reached the end of chapters and wanted to know what came next. She called Petra more often than Petra called her, which Petra had noticed and mentioned, with the particular, gentle satisfaction of someone watching a person they loved come back to themselves. She had begun to look forward to things. That had been the most significant change, and also the hardest to explain to anyone who had not experienced its absence. She had spent 2 years in a forward-facing crouch, managing the present, anticipating threat, moving from one contained moment to the next, without any real sense that what came after was going to be good. Not negative, necessarily. Just absent. The future had not held anything she was moving toward. It had just been more of the present, more of the managing, more of the same careful, necessary containment. Now there were things in the future she was moving toward. Dinner next week. Birch's follow-up appointment at the rescue center, which she had scheduled because she wanted to check on how the other animals from his intake group were doing. A conversation with Nina about the conduct protocol proposal, which was moving through the oversight committee, and which Nina had developed into an almost personal mission. Saturday with Petra, who was planning to teach her to make the lamb stew she had been making every winter for 20 years, and had apparently decided it was time Mara knew how. Small things. Real things. She had forgotten how much real things mattered. The dinner came before the follow-up appointment, and before the stew lesson, on a Wednesday evening in the 3rd week after the convergence, and it was as good as she had hoped, and also different from what she had expected, which was the way good things usually were. She had expected it to feel consequential, in a weighty, significant, careful way. She had expected to be managing herself through it, watching her words, staying alert, performing ease rather than having it. What had actually happened was that they had sat down across from each other, and she had said, "Are you nervous?" and he had said yes, and something in her had settled immediately and permanently. She was not sure why that had worked so well. She thought it was probably because she had spent 2 years around a man who had never admitted to anything, who moved through every interaction with the smooth, impenetrable confidence of someone who had decided that vulnerability was a liability. And here was a man who was the alpha king of 5 territories, and who had sat down across from her at a corner table and said yes, simply and directly, without making it a performance of vulnerability or a strategy to put her at ease. He had just been honest. It had made everything easier. They had talked for 3 hours. She had not noticed the time passing, which was something that happened to her very rarely. She was a person who tracked time carefully, who knew how long things had been going on, who marked the passage of an evening in internal increments. She had not noticed the time because she had been entirely present, which was also something that had not happened in a while. They had talked about books, and about where they had grown up, and about what they found difficult, and what they wanted. He had told her things that she understood were not things he told easily, not because they were dramatic, but because they were private, the interior contents of a person who spent most of his time being a symbol of something rather than simply himself. She had told him things too. Not everything. Not the full weight of 2 years, which was not something you gave to someone over a first dinner, no matter how good the dinner was, but real things, the version of herself she had been before all of this, the way she had changed, what she was working to recover, what she thought she might never fully recover, and had decided to accept. He had listened the way he listened to everything, completely, without the slight forward lean of someone waiting to respond, without the sympathetic sounds that people inserted to show they were following. He just listened. He looked at her. And when he did respond, it was to something specific she had said, not a general comfort offered to the shape of the story. She had not been listened to like that in a long time. She had walked home in the cold and thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Not the particular story of this specific person. She was too careful for that, too aware of the many ways things could change, but the feeling of being with someone, the feeling of not being alone in a conversation. She had missed that. She was so glad to have it back. Birch learned the archive in 2 weeks. By the end of his first month, he knew which staff members would give him treats if he sat near their desks, with his large ears positioned at maximum expressiveness, and which ones would not. and he adjusted his proximity accordingly. He knew that the reading room was quiet, and that the filing corridor was not, and he preferred the quiet in the afternoons. He knew that Mara's desk was his desk, adjacent, and that the chair underneath it was his chair, when she did not need her feet there, and he occupied it with the authority of someone who had made a decision and was not revisiting it. He also knew when Mara's phone buzzed with a message from Caius, which she had not consciously taught him, but which he had apparently inferred from her response to it. The slight change in her posture, the quality of her attention shifting, because he would look up from wherever he was, and then look back at her, with a knowing patience that she found embarrassing and also endearing. "You are very perceptive," she told him once. He blinked slowly, in a way that said he was aware of that. Caius came to the Northern Territory 3 times, between the convergence and the formal conduct review conclusion. Once for the resource audit, which was official and which gave him a legitimate reason to be in the territory that did not require any explanation. Once for a bilateral meeting with the Northern Territory director, which was also official. The 3rd time he came with no official reason and arrived at the archive on a Saturday morning when she was working through the backlog of quarterly cross-references and told her he had 2 hours before his car came, and they sat in the reading room and talked until the 2 hours were nearly gone, and then he had left without making a production of the leaving, which she appreciated. He had a quality that she found more valuable the better she understood it. He did not perform. He did not perform interest or warmth or authority or ease. He was simply those things, or he was not, in a given moment, and you knew immediately which one it was, because there was no layer of presentation between his reality and hers. It made her trust him in the particular way you trusted things that did not try to manage your perception of them. She was learning, slowly, to let herself trust it. Her counselor. She had started seeing someone again. A quiet woman named Dr. Voss who had an office near the archive, and who specialized in exactly the kind of thing Mara had been carrying, had said something in their 3rd session that had stayed with her. "You have been the person who kept the record," Dr. Voss had said. "For 2 years, you were the only person who knew the whole truth of what happened to you. That is a particular kind of loneliness. The work now is learning that you are not the only one who knows anymore." Mara had thought about that for several days. She was still thinking about it. But she was also, and this was new, talking about it. Not constantly, not to everyone, but to Petra, who knew the full story now, and who had responded to it, not with pity, but with the particular, fierce loyalty of someone who felt the gap between what had happened and what should have happened, and intended to hold the space for the difference. And to Nina, whose practical, affectionate presence across the distance of a phone call was exactly the kind of company she had not known she needed, and, carefully and in pieces, to Caius. She had not expected Caius to be easy to talk to. She had expected him to be good at it. He was good at everything that required intelligence and attention, but she had expected it to feel formal, or at least a little effortful, because he was the Alpha King, and she was a records coordinator, and those 2 things were very far apart in the structure of the world they both inhabited. What she had not expected was that with him, specifically, the distance felt negligible, not because he pretended it did not exist. He did not do that. He was too honest for erasure, too precise about the reality of things. But he seemed to hold it the way you held a fact that did not affect the substance of what was happening between you. It was a fact. It was not a barrier. She was learning to hold it that way too. The conduct protocol proposal moved through the oversight committee in the late winter, and into the formal review process in early spring. Mara tracked it the way she tracked all significant documents, methodically, with the appropriate references noted, and the stage change notifications filed in the resolution document as each one arrived. She had submitted the proposal through the formal channel, as she had told Nina she would, and Nina had followed it up through Director Halford, as she had told Mara she would, and the result had been that the proposal reached the right desk faster than it would have through any single route. She had not been surprised by this. She had spent 4 years organizing records and 8 years before that learning how information moved through institutions, and she understood, very thoroughly, that the official channel and the effective channel were often related, but rarely identical. You needed both. You submitted through the official channel because that was the correct thing to do, and because the official record mattered. And you made sure the right people knew it was there, because the official channel alone was not always enough. She had learned that the hard way. She was using what she had learned. Director Lena Holt contacted her in February to ask 3 clarifying questions about the proposal's language around the independent reviewer appointment process. Mara answered them in a document that was also precise and thorough, because she was a records coordinator and that was how she did things. Director Cavell's office sent a formal note of support in March. Cole had mentioned, in passing, during one of the Saturday calls, that the proposal had come up at a cross-territorial leadership briefing, and that the reception had been positive. He had mentioned it in the tone of someone mentioning a weather forecast, informative, not promotional. She was not surprised by Cole either. She had come to understand Cole as a person who operated with a particular, useful combination of qualities: complete competence, absolute discretion, and the rare ability to be present in a situation without influencing its direction. He told her things because the things were relevant, and because she had a right to know them. He did not tell her things to manage her or comfort her. He was not in the habit of managing people. He was in the habit of informing them, and then letting them use the information as they chose. She liked him very much. She had told him so once, directly, and he had looked at her with the slight surprise of someone not used to being told things directly and said, "Thank you, Ms. Elliott. That is reciprocated." She had smiled all the way back to her desk. Spring arrived. The city lightened. The days got longer in the particular, incremental way of northern spring, where the change was happening for weeks, before you suddenly noticed one morning that the light was different, and the air had a smell it had not had the day before. Birch noticed the change before she did. He had been restless in the evenings for about a week, not anxious, just alert, with the quality of an animal who knew that something in the outside world was shifting and wanted to be part of it. She started taking him for longer walks in the mornings, and the walks became one of the best parts of her day. There was a park 4 streets from her building that had a long looping path and 2 benches and a view of the old bridge over the river. She and Birch walked it every morning at 7, in all weathers. In the winter it had been dark when they went out, and the park had been quiet and cold, and they had had it entirely to themselves. In the spring, other people were starting to appear: dog walkers, runners, a man who sat on the south bench every morning with a coffee and a book and never appeared to look up from either. She walked the loop. She thought about the day ahead. She thought about the proposal moving through the committee. She thought about dinner on Friday, which she was looking forward to with a straightforwardness that was becoming one of the characteristics of the new shape of her life. The absence of the old, complicated negotiation she used to have with herself about whether she was allowed to look forward to things. She was allowed. She looked forward to things now. It seemed, in retrospect, like an obvious place to arrive. It had not been obvious at the time. The spring council session was held in the 2nd week of April. Mara attended the formal adoption session for the conduct protocol as a gallery observer, with a press credential organized by Director Holt's communications team, which she had not expected, and which had arrived in her email 3 days before the session, with a brief note from Holt's assistant saying, "You should be in the room when this passes." She was in the room. She sat in the public gallery above the main chamber with a straight back and her hands folded on the railing, and watched the session move through its procedural stages with the particular patience of someone who understood that formal processes required their correct amount of time, and that rushing them, even when the outcome seemed clear, was a mistake. The vote was not close. 31 in favor, 4 against, 2 abstentions. She wrote the numbers in the resolution document while the clerk was still reading the final count. Afterward, in the corridor outside the council building, Cole had the coffees. She had not told him she wanted one, which meant either he had anticipated it or Caius had told him, and she thought it was probably the latter, which she found she did not mind at all. "Congratulations," Cole said. "The committee," she started. "Had your proposal," Cole said, which was what he always said when she tried to distribute credit to institutions that had used her work. Birch was at the archive, with Diane. The afternoon was warm, and the street was full of ordinary people, doing ordinary things, and somewhere inside the building behind her, the conduct protocol was being entered into the official record of the council, and would be there, permanently, as part of the institutional history of what had been changed, and why, and by whom. She thought about that. She thought about the document she had kept for 2 years on a locked laptop in a small apartment. Records kept things honest. Records kept things real. Records survived. Caius came out 23 minutes after her. He walked down the steps toward her, with the ease she had come to know completely. Not the performed ease of a man in a public position, but the actual ease of someone who had learned to simply be where they were. "Well done," he said. "You keep saying that," she said. "You keep giving me reason to," he said. She looked at him. She thought about the gathering, months ago, and a woman she used to be, who had stood by a wall and counted exits, and held herself very still against the weight of everything she could not say out loud. She thought about a knock on her apartment door on a Tuesday evening, and Petra's voice through the door, and a choice she had almost not made. She had gone. She had gone, and she had stood in the room for 2 hours, and she had come back. Everything else had followed from that. "Lunch?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked down the street in the spring light. Birch was waiting at the archive. The record was permanent and complete. She was not braced. She was not counting exits. She was just here, walking in the light, headed toward something good. There was one more thing she had not told anyone. She had been keeping it in the same quiet, internal place where she kept things that needed time before she was ready to examine them properly. It was not a secret exactly. It was more like something that had been present for a while, and that she had been allowing to simply exist, without naming it or analyzing it, or asking herself what it meant for the future. She was going to name it now. She was in the archive on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the formal protocol adoption, doing the quarterly review of the cross-reference systems. Birch was asleep under her desk. The building was quiet in the way it was always quiet on Tuesday afternoons, which was one of the reasons she liked them. She had a cup of tea that was still warm, and a document that was nearly finished, and the particular, settled feeling of work that was going well. Her phone was on the desk beside her keyboard. It buzzed. A message from Caius. "I am going to be in the Northern Territory on Thursday. Not for official reasons, just because I want to be." She read it twice. She thought about what to say. She typed, "Then come Thursday." His reply was immediate, "I will." She put the phone down. She looked at the document on her screen. She thought about the things she had been keeping in the quiet internal place, the things she had been allowing to exist without naming it. She was naming it now. She was in love with him. She had been for a while, probably. Since the preparation room, maybe. Or since the dinner. Or since the Saturday morning, when he had shown up at the archive with no official reason, and stayed for 2 hours, and left without making anything of the leaving. She was not entirely sure when it had started, because feelings that arrived quietly, without announcement, were hard to date precisely. She was a records coordinator. She was used to being precise about dates. The imprecision was itself information. She set the thought aside, not because she was afraid of it. She was not, and this too was new, the absence of the instinctive recoil from something that mattered, but because she had work to finish, and because the feeling was good and settled and did not require immediate action. It could be carried quietly for a little longer while she decided what she wanted to do with it. She finished the cross-reference review. She closed up the archive at 5:30. She walked home with Birch in the evening light, and the city was ordinary around them, and she was not managing anything, and the feeling sat in her chest like something warm and real and entirely, completely hers. On Thursday, Caius arrived at noon. He had texted from the car, 20 minutes. She had finished her morning work and tidied her desk, and told Birch, who had been tracking her slightly elevated energy since 9 o'clock, that she was not going to discuss his perceptiveness. He came in through the public entrance, and she met him in the foyer, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the way they did sometimes, the recognition settling between them that was not like anything else she had with anyone else. "Hello," he said. "Hello," she said. They went to lunch. Not the archive reading room this time, but a place down the street that did very good sandwiches, and had a small garden that was almost warm enough in April if you sat in the right spot. They sat in the right spot. Birch sat under the table and accepted one piece of bread from Caius, and then watched him with the evaluative intensity of someone deciding whether to revise an opinion upward. They talked. About the protocol adoption and what came next. about the independent oversight review of Penn's case history, about the 6 other cases that had been flagged for reinvestigation, and what the process would look like for the people involved in them. She had been thinking about those people, the ones whose complaints had been closed by the same system that had closed hers. She had written a brief to Director Holt's office about the possibility of proactive outreach to the affected complainants, to make sure they knew the reinvestigation was happening and that they had a point of contact. Holt's office told me, Caius said. I assumed Cole told you, she said. He smiled. Cole told me. Then Holt's office confirmed it. He looked at her. It was a good brief. It was a straightforward brief, she said. The right thing to do was obvious once you thought about it from the other person's position. That is the part most people skip, he said. The thinking from the other person's position. She looked at him. She thought about the things she had named on Tuesday. She had decided what she wanted to do with it. She waited until the lunch was done, and they had walked back to the archive, and she had shown him the progress on the cross-reference system upgrade, which he had asked about, because he had been listening the last time she talked about it, and he remembered things. She waited until Birch had been introduced to the afternoon light in the reading room, and had decided it was suitable for a nap. She waited until they were standing in the foyer at the end of it, the natural pause before goodbye. I want to tell you something, she said. He looked at her. I have been carrying it for a while, she said, and I have decided that I would rather say it than keep carrying it, because I am done with carrying things I do not have to carry alone. He was very still, not tense, just present, fully present. I am in love with you, she said, plainly, directly, without softening or framing, the way she said things that mattered. I do not need you to say anything about that right now. I just needed to say it, because it is true, and you deserve to know true things. He was looking at her with that expression she had spent months learning to read, the complete, direct attention, the absence of performance. Then he said, I have been in love with you since the documentation room. She looked at him. The first time, he said. When you told me that records kept things honest, I did not know what to call it then, but I knew something had changed. He paused. I have been very carefully not saying it, because I was not sure you were ready to hear it, and I did not want to be another person who moved faster than you needed. She breathed. I was ready, she said. I know, he said. I could see that. Then why? Because you were the one who needed to say it first, he said. It needed to come from you, on your terms. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped forward, and she put her arms around him, and he held her in the foyer of the Northern Territory Archive on a Thursday afternoon in April, with Birch asleep in the reading room and the building quiet around them, and she felt the particular, enormous, completely ordinary relief of something being exactly what it was supposed to be. She had not been held like that in a long time. She had not been held like that, she thought, possibly ever, with that specific quality of someone who was not going anywhere, who was not performing safety but actually being it, who held her with the steadiness of someone who understood that she did not need rescuing, but was allowed to be held anyway. She stood there for a while. He did not rush her. When she stepped back, she looked at him, and he looked at her, and there was nothing complicated between them. Just the two of them in the afternoon light, clear-eyed and steady and entirely, completely sure. Thursday lunches, she said. Every one, he said. She smiled. He smiled back. Outside, the city was doing what cities did. Moving, living, conducting its ordinary, irreplaceable business. Inside the archive, records were being kept. Across 5 territories, a new protocol was in effect. In 6 reinvestigation files, 6 people, who had been told their truth was not enough, were being told, now, that it was. And in the foyer of a building where documents were preserved and systems were maintained, and the work of keeping things honest was done quietly and precisely every day, 2 people were standing in the afternoon light, not performing anything. Just there. Just themselves. Just fine. What nobody had told Mara when she had first begun to come back to herself was that the process was not linear. She had assumed, somewhere beneath the deliberate thinking she tried to bring to things, that healing would resemble the other kinds of recovery she had experienced, a steady, measurable progression from one state to a better one, a graph with an upward line. She had imagined she would notice herself getting better in the way you noticed a room getting warmer, gradually and then all at once. What it actually resembled was weather. There were mornings when she woke before her alarm and lay in the dark and felt the weight of the past 2 years settle across her chest, like something physical, specific and unavoidable, and she had to decide, before she got up, that she was going to get up anyway. There were afternoons at the archive when she would open the cross-reference system and feel, for no identifiable reason, the particular hollow exhaustion of someone who had been running on managed reserves for too long and had not quite finished filling back up. There were evenings when Birch pressed his large, warm head against her knee, and she was grateful for it, in a way that felt almost overwhelming, the disproportionate gratitude of someone who had been doing without simple good things for long enough that their return carried extra weight. These moments came less often as the spring progressed. But they came. She had learned, through the sessions with Dr. Voss, to stop treating them as setbacks. A setback implied a previous position that had been held and then lost, and that was not what this was. This was more like tide. The general direction was in, toward shore, toward solid ground, but it was not a straight line, and it was not always perceptible, and there were days when it pulled back before it came forward again. She told Caius about this on a Thursday. Not with difficulty. She had stopped finding it difficult to tell him things, which was itself a measure of how far she had come. She told him the way she told him most things now, directly, without embellishment, because he handled direct and unembellished information better than he handled anything wrapped in performance. "I do not think I will ever be entirely the person I was before," she said. They were in the reading room, the late Thursday afternoon having settled around them the way it always did when he came, warm and quiet and particular to itself. Birch was on his spot. The light was good. "I used to think recovery meant getting back to who I was. I think now it means becoming who I am, after everything that happened." He was looking at her with his usual complete attention. "Is that all right?" he said. Not "are you all right," she had noticed, in the months since the convergence, that he had stopped asking that particular question. He asked better ones. "Yes," she said. "It is more than all right. I think I like who I am after. I just had to get clear about the fact that she is different from who I was before." He was quiet for a moment. "I like who you are after," he said. She looked at him. "You never knew who I was before," she said. "No," he said. "But I know who you are now, and I think she is the right person to know." She looked at the reading room around them, the tall windows, the good lamps, the long tables where people came to sit with careful things and read them slowly. This had been her favorite room in the building since her first week at the archive, 4 years ago. She had eaten her lunch here, alone, on hundreds of Tuesdays and Thursdays. She had sat here when things were very bad, and the quiet was the only thing that helped. She had shown him this room, because she wanted him to know it, because it was the part of her workplace that was actually hers. He had understood that immediately. He had come back to this room, on each subsequent visit, without her having to suggest it. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Yes." "The conduct review. The convergence. All of it." She paused, arranging the question she had been working toward for a while. If I had not been there, if I had said no to Petra, and not gone to the gathering, what would have happened to my file? He was quiet for a longer moment than usual. "I would have found it," he said. "Not then, and not that way." But the Penn case history was already generating questions in the oversight office. The pattern would have come up eventually. He paused. But eventually is not the same as the convergence. Eventually might have been a year from now, or 2 years, and it would have come from an institutional review rather than from you. The finding would have been narrower. Another pause. The protocol would not exist. She looked at him. "The protocol came from you," he said. "From your specific, documented experience. From knowing exactly which gaps existed because you had fallen through all of them." He looked at her steadily. "The institution would have found the Penn pattern eventually, but it would not have known what to do with it without you." She thought about that. She thought about Petra at her apartment door on a Tuesday evening, saying, "I know you are in there. I can see your light under the door." She thought about the way small things had consequences that were impossible to predict from where you were standing when you made them. "I almost did not go," she said. "I know," he said. "I am very glad you did." She was very glad she had too. She was glad about a lot of things, these days. That was not nothing. That was, in fact, everything. The 6 reinvestigation cases moved through the independent oversight process through the summer. Mara had no formal role in the reinvestigations. She was not a council member or a legal representative or any kind of official. She was a records coordinator who had filed a complaint and kept a document and proposed a protocol, all of which were now part of the institutional record and no longer required her active involvement. She was not passive about it. She had written to Director Holt's office twice with questions about the complainant outreach process and received thorough, direct responses both times, which she appreciated. She had connected, through an introduction arranged carefully by Cole on Caius's behalf but presented as a departmental initiative, with the council's formal victim liaison office, which was exactly as new and somewhat under-resourced as she had expected it to be, having been created by the protocol she had proposed and therefore not yet having the institutional depth of a long-established service. She had offered to help them develop their documentation systems. They had accepted, with what she recognized as the slight, controlled relief of an organization that desperately needed the kind of help she was offering and had not been sure it was appropriate to ask for. She spent 4 Tuesday afternoons in May helping the liaison office set up their incoming case management system. She did this on her own time, not as an archive function, and she brought Birch, because Birch had a calming quality in institutional settings that she thought the liaison office would benefit from, and she was right. By the end of the second session, 2 of the 3 liaison staff had started addressing Birch by name and had begun bringing him treats. Birch accepted these developments with complete composure. She also wrote, on a Saturday morning in June, a letter to each of the 6 people whose cases were being reinvestigated. She did not know most of them. She knew they existed because the oversight process had identified their files, and she knew the general nature of what had happened to them because the pen pattern was consistent. She did not know their names or their stories. She wrote the letter as though she were writing to herself, 2 years ago, at the moment the form letter had arrived. She did not say anything about the outcome of her own case, or about the protocol, or about any of the things that had happened since. She just said, I know it feels impossible right now. I know you have been told, by the system that was supposed to help you, that what happened to you was not enough. I want you to know that someone read what you wrote. It mattered. She sent the letters through the liaison office, which delivered them without identifying her as the sender. 3 people wrote back. 2 of the letters were brief, a few lines, careful and formal, the language of people who were not sure yet how much to trust. One of them was longer. It was from a woman who had filed a complaint 4 years ago and had spent the years since in a state Mara recognized precisely, the state of someone managing a reality that the institution had declined to validate. The letter said, among other things, I kept writing things down. I did not know why. I think I kept writing because I needed it to be real somewhere, even if only on my laptop. Mara read that sentence twice. She thought about how many people there were in the world keeping records in locked folders on laptops that no one ever read. She thought about what it meant that the record had mattered, that the truth, kept carefully and long enough, had found someone willing to receive it. She wrote back. She wrote back as herself, this time, with her name and her position, and the things she was willing to share. It was the first time she had told her story to someone she had not chosen specifically. Not Petra, not Nina, not Caius or Cole or Dr. Voss, but a stranger. A stranger who was not entirely a stranger, because they had been through the same institution and had been failed by it in the same way. It was a different kind of conversation than any she had had before. Not harder exactly, just different, more exposed, in a way that was also, she found, more connected. She kept writing back. They met, eventually, in the autumn, at a coffee shop near the archive. The woman was quieter in person than in her letters. Birch sat between their chairs and accepted attention from both of them, and made the whole thing easier in the way that Birch consistently made things easier. They talked for 2 hours. Mara walked home afterward and felt something she did not have a complete word for. Not pride, not exactly. Something more like the recognition of a line connecting a beginning and a place further along. The sense of something continuing past where she had thought it ended. She was not the end of the story. She was, maybe, a part of the beginning of something else. That was more than she had hoped for, in the years when hoping had been difficult. It was worth having. The autumn was good. She had not always been able to say that about a season. Seasons had blurred, for a while. Winter into spring, into summer, into autumn. The same internal weather behind different external ones. The same careful management. The same measured getting through. This autumn had a distinct quality. It was hers, specifically. She could feel herself in it. She walked Birch every morning in the leaf-bright streets and watched the city change into its autumn version, which was her favorite, the particular gold of the afternoon light, the way the air smelled in October, the general settling of things that came when summer's expansive energy compressed into something more concentrated and interior. She and Caius had established a rhythm. Thursdays, when the territory schedule allowed, were the Northern Territory. He came without announcement, and they went to lunch, and walked, and spent time in the archive reading room, and sometimes, if the timing worked, he stayed for dinner, and the evenings had a quality she had come to rely on, easy and real, and without the performance she had once brought to everything. They had also, in the months since April, established a regular call on Sunday evenings. It had started as a practical thing, a way of staying connected across the distance of the week, and the territories, and the fullness of his schedule and hers. It had become one of the anchoring points of her week, the kind of thing that made Sunday evenings good, even when they had been unremarkable. She told him things on those calls, small things and large things, in the unsorted order in which they occurred to her, without worrying about whether they were significant enough, or coherent enough, or would be received the way she hoped. She had learned that the receiving was reliable, that she could say the thing and he would hear it, and it would not come back to her in an altered form. She had not had that before. She thought about it sometimes, the years before the convergence, when she had become so practiced at not saying things that she had started to lose track of what she would say if she could. She had told Dr. Voss about this, and Dr. Voss had said, "That is what happens to the voice when it is not used. It gets quiet, it does not go away, it just waits." Her voice had been waiting for a long time. She was using it now. In October, Petra came for the lamb stew lesson that had been rescheduled twice from the spring. She arrived on a Saturday morning with ingredients and a particular purposefulness, and set up in Mara's kitchen with the authority of someone who had been cooking this dish for 22 years and had strong feelings about the correct order of operations. They cooked for 3 hours. Birch sat under the kitchen table and monitored the process with professional interest. Petra talked almost the entire time, about her work and her life and the man she had been seeing since August who was, she said, either very good or very suspicious, and she had not yet decided which. "Tell me about Caius," Petra said, at some point in the middle of the second hour, while she was making Mara stir something she was clearly going to take over stirring in approximately 90 seconds. Mara stirred. "What do you want to know?" she said. "Anything," Petra said. "Everything. You have been very careful and very private about it, which is fine, but I have been your closest friend for 11 years, and I would like to know something real." Mara thought about it. "He listens," she said. "That is the first thing. He actually listens, not in the way people perform listening, but in the way that means he remembers what you said 3 weeks ago, and connects it to what you are saying now. He reads things properly. He asks good questions." She paused. "He does not perform anything. Whatever he is, confident or tired or uncertain or glad, it is just there. There is no layer between him and the reality of what he is feeling." Petra had stopped pretending not to be going to take over the stirring, and had taken over the stirring. "That sounds," she said carefully, "like the opposite of what you have been used to." "Yes," Mara said. "Is that frightening?" "It was," Mara said. "It is not anymore." Petra stirred. She looked at the pot, with the attention of someone giving a conversation space. "Are you happy?" she said. Mara thought about the question. "Yes," she said. "I am actually happy. Not managed happy. Not getting through happy. Actual." Petra nodded. She kept stirring. "Good," she said. "That is what I needed to know." They ate the stew at Mara's small kitchen table, with the autumn light coming through the window, and Birch at their feet, and a bottle of wine that Petra had brought, and the easy, unhurried conversation of two people who had been friends for long enough that the friendship had its own particular weight and history and comfort. Mara thought, eating the stew that she had helped make, and that tasted of something warm and known and good, I missed this. I missed exactly this. A meal I helped cook, and a friend across the table, and a dog at my feet, and the feeling of an evening that has nothing to be managed. She had missed it. She had it back. She was keeping it. In November, just over a year after the convergence, the final resolution of the Grove case was formally entered into the Permanent Council record. Mara received the notification through the formal channel, a brief, official letter from the Joint Conduct Authority, confirming that all review processes had been completed, all findings were final, and the case was now permanently closed in the institutional record. Permanently closed. She read that phrase twice. The first time it had appeared in her life, those two words had been the end of something, the end of hope, the end of a path she had believed in, the end of the version of herself who thought the truth was enough on its own. The form letter, 6 weeks after she had filed, with its insufficient evidence and its indifferent closure. Now those two words were the end of something else. The end of a case that had been wrong and had been corrected. The end of Harlan Grove's delegate career. The end of Aldrich Penn's access to the review process. The end of 2 years of fighting a battle that no one around her had known was happening. She saved the notification in the resolution document. She wrote, below it, a single sentence. The record is complete. She closed the document. She looked at her desk, at Birch under it, asleep with the complete abandon of an animal who had decided he was safe. At the archive systems on her screen, mid-morning cross-reference, the work that was just the work, good and reliable, and hers. At the window, with its view of the street outside, where the November morning was cold and gray and entirely ordinary. She picked up her phone. She called Caius. He answered on the second ring. The final notification came, she said. I know, he said. My office received the parallel notification 10 minutes ago. A pause. How are you? She thought about the question. She thought about 2 years of a locked folder, and a locked door, and a locked internal life, all held very carefully, so nothing spilled. She thought about a knock on a door on a Tuesday evening, and the reluctant choice that had changed everything. She thought about 11 minutes in a council chamber, and the particular, total silence of a room that had heard something real. She thought about Birch and Petra and Nina and Dr. Voss and Cole, about the liaison office and the woman who had written back and the letters that were still continuing, slowly, carefully, about a reading room on Thursday afternoons and Sunday evening calls and the lamb stew she had learned to make, about records and what they were for, about truth and what it needed. I am good, she said. I am actually, completely, specifically good. She heard him breathe. Good, he said. And in the way he said it, she heard everything the word contained. She looked at the window. The November morning was cold and gray and entirely ordinary. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. The year turned. Winter arrived in the Northern Territory with the particular thoroughness of a season that had decided to make its presence known. The streets went gray, and the river went dark, and the archive building became warmer inside relative to the outside, which meant that Birch began positioning himself near the radiator in the mornings, with the strategic intentionality of an animal who understood that the best spots required claiming early. Mara had always liked winter. She had liked it even during the 2 years when she had not liked much else. There was something in the quality of winter that suited a certain kind of interior life, the longer evenings, the way the city drew in on itself, the permission winter gave to stay indoors and read and make tea, and not require anything expansive of yourself. She had used those winters to keep the document and keep herself together, and do the quiet, essential work of surviving something that she had not known at the time she was going to come out the other side of. This winter was different. This winter she was not surviving. She was living, which was a distinction she had not fully understood until she found herself on the right side of it. She decorated the apartment for the first time in 3 years. Not elaborately. She was not an elaborate person, and had never pretended to be. But properly. A wreath on the door. Lights along the windowsill. A small tree that Birch inspected thoroughly, and then decided was not a threat. She had not realized, until she was putting up the lights, that she had not done this, because doing it had felt like a claim on a future she was not sure she trusted. Decorating was an act of expectation she had not been able to expect for a while. She could now. She put up the lights. Caius came for the last Thursday before the winter break. He arrived at noon with Cole's efficient departure at the door and a small, plain-wrapped package under one arm, which he set on the reading room table, with the slight self-consciousness of someone who did not normally bring presents but had decided to. "It is not dramatic," he said. "It is practical." She unwrapped it. It was a notebook. Not a generic one, but a specific kind. The kind used by the council's own archivists for handwritten records, which were kept alongside the digital systems for redundancy. The cover was dark green, and the paper inside was the particular weight and quality that told her, immediately, that someone had found out what archivist-grade notebooks were before purchasing this one. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You asked Director Holt's office what notebooks the archivists used," she said. "I asked Cole to ask Director Holt's office," he said. "There is a distinction." "There is not," she said. He almost smiled. She held the notebook. It had that specific weight of a thing that was very well made for its purpose. The weight that said, "This will last. This will hold what you put in it. This is built to be relied on." "Thank you," she said. "You can use it for whatever you want," he said. "The resolution document. New things. Whatever needs keeping." She set it on the table. She looked at it for a moment. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what I want to keep next." He waited. "Not evidence," she said, "not incidents. I have been thinking about keeping, I do not know the right word, the other kind of records, the things that are good and worth documenting, the way the things that were bad were documented." She paused. "There are a lot of them. I think I have not been keeping track of them the way I kept track of the difficult things, and that is a gap in the record." He was looking at her. "That seems right," he said. "The stew lesson," she said. "Birch's first morning at the archive. The bar 2 streets from Aldermere Hall." She paused. "The reading room." "The reading room," he agreed. She picked up the notebook. She opened the first page. She wrote the date at the top, in her usual, precise hand. Below it she wrote, "The reading room. Thursday afternoon. The light is good. Birch is on his spot." This is the beginning of the other kind of record. She closed the notebook. She looked at him. He was looking at her, with the expression she knew now completely. The whole, direct, present attention that had nothing managed in it. "Ready?" he said. She was not entirely sure what he was asking. Ready for lunch, maybe? Or ready for the afternoon? Or ready for what came after the afternoon, and after that, and all the things that followed from choosing to be somewhere good and staying there? "Yes," she said. She was. Birch woke up from his spot on the reading room floor, looked at both of them with his large, judicious eyes, and then stood up and shook himself and went to the door. He was ready too. They went. The spring that followed was the first spring Mara had looked forward to in 3 years. She had begun to understand that the seasons were markers, not just of time passing, but of herself passing through time differently. The autumn of the convergence, the winter of recovery, the spring of the protocol adoption, the summer of the reinvestigations, the autumn of meeting the woman who had kept her own records, the winter of the green notebook and the lights on the windowsill. Each season had its own character, its own specific weight and texture, and she was keeping them differently now, not in the locked folder, not in the careful, defensive language of someone building a case. In the green notebook, in the handwriting that was just hers, the things she wanted to keep because they were good, and because keeping good things was its own kind of practice, the practice of learning that the future held something worth recording. She wrote about Birch's second spring, which he greeted with the same alert, evaluative attention he had given the first one. She wrote about Nina's visit in March, when they had finally managed to be in the same city at the same time, without a professional reason, and had spent a whole Saturday at the market, and in the archive, and at the bar that was nothing to do with the convergence, and everything to do with them. She wrote about the liaison office, which had grown into something real and staffed and functional, with a case management system that she was quietly proud of, and a young woman named Dara who ran it, with a competence that sometimes reminded her of herself at the beginning, before everything. She wrote about Thursday afternoons in the reading room. She wrote about Sunday evening calls and the particular quality of Caius's voice when he was tired, and talking about something he trusted her to hear without performing a response to. She wrote about the conversations with Dr. Voss that were becoming, slowly, less about the past and more about the future. about what the future actually looked like from where she was standing, which was a question she had not been able to answer for a long time. She was answering it now. In April, on the anniversary of the protocol adoption, Director Holt's office organized a small event, not a formal ceremony, but a staff gathering at the council building, with the people who had been most directly involved in the review process. Mara attended with the status of invited contributor, which was the accurate description of her role, and also the most understated possible way of describing it, which was, she thought, completely appropriate. She stood in the council building with a glass of something fizzy, and talked to the two liaison staff who had been there from the beginning, and to Dara, and to Director Cavell, who shook her hand with the warmth of someone who meant it, and to Cole, who had come on behalf of the Alpha King's office, and who stood beside her at one point and said, very quietly, he wanted to be here. He has 3 sessions he cannot move. She had nodded. She had known he would have 3 sessions he could not move. That was the shape of his life, and she understood it, and had made her peace with it, in the way that you made peace with the shape of someone's life, when you chose to be part of it. She had sent him a message from the event. Wish you were here. He had replied, between the 2nd and 3rd unmovable sessions. I know. So do I. Tell Cole to eat something. He never does at these things. She had relayed this to Cole, who had looked at his empty glass, and then at the food table and said, a fair point, and gone to get something to eat. She had smiled. The gathering lasted 2 hours. She stayed for all of it, which was not something she had always been able to do at events like this, not because she lacked the stamina, but because she had, for 2 years, lacked the willingness to be present in rooms that required her to be simply herself, without the armor of a role or a task. She was present now. Entirely, specifically, willingly present. She talked to everyone who came to talk to her. She answered questions about the protocol and the proposal and the process. She told the truth when people asked how it had felt, which was complicated and multiple, and she said so, because the truth was not simple, and simplifying it would have been its own kind of inaccuracy, and she was a records coordinator, and inaccurate records bothered her. On the way out, Director Holt stopped her. I want to tell you something, Holt said. She was a woman who chose her words with the same precision she brought to everything else, and Mara had learned to pay close attention when she spoke. The council has been discussing a formal role, Holt said, on the Conduct Oversight Committee, a complainant advocate position, someone who has been through the process, who understands it from the inside, who can advise the committee on the gaps between what the protocol says and what the experience of using it actually is. She looked at Mara directly. The position does not exist yet. It is being proposed. I want to know if you would consider it. Mara looked at her. She thought about the things she had spent 2 years keeping. She thought about what it had been for. She thought about the liaison office, and Dara, and the woman who had written back, and the 6 reinvestigation cases, and all the things that had been set in motion by the act of keeping the record long enough to find someone who would read it. Yes, she said, I would consider it. Holt nodded. I will be in touch. Mara walked out of the council building into the spring afternoon. She called Caius from the street. He answered between sessions, which she knew because she could hear the building sounds behind him, and the particular, brief quality of his attention that meant he had stepped out of one thing to take this. Holt offered me a position, she said. A brief silence. I know, he said. She asked me about it last week. I told her it was entirely your decision, and that I thought you were exactly the right person. She stood on the street in the spring afternoon. You did not tell me she was going to ask, she said. It was her offer to make, he said, not mine to preview. She thought about that. You are very careful, she said. With you, he said. Yes, always. She looked at the street. The spring afternoon was doing its spring afternoon thing, warm and pale and full of the particular energy of a city that had come through winter and was glad of it. I said yes, she said. Another brief silence. Good, he said. And then, I have to go back in. Go, she said. I will tell you everything on Sunday. Yes, he said, everything. He went back in. She put her phone in her pocket. She looked at the street for a moment longer. Then she walked toward the archive, because it was Tuesday and she had a cross-reference to finish, and because the work was good, and the building was warm, and Birch was waiting, and because all of that was real, and hers, and worth going toward. She went toward it. The green notebook filled up slowly, the way good things filled, not rushed, not forced, in the natural pace of a life being lived. She wrote in it on Thursday evenings, usually, when Caius had left and the apartment was quiet and Birch was on the sofa and she was still in the good warmth of the afternoon, and wanted to put something of it down before it passed. She had kept records of the bad things so that they could not be erased or denied. She kept records of the good things so that they could not be forgotten or taken for granted. She was not going to take anything for granted. She had learned, thoroughly and at cost, what it looked like when good things were taken away. She had no intention of treating the good things she had now with the careless familiarity of someone who believed they would always be there. She paid attention. She wrote it down. The morning Birch discovered the park by the new route and stood at the entrance with his ears at full extension, evaluating it with the gravitas of a general assessing terrain. The Tuesday that Dara had called to say that one of the reinvestigation complainants had received a formal institutional apology and had cried on the phone, and Dara had cried too, and Mara had sat at her desk with the phone in her hand and felt the weight of it land in the specific, necessary way of things that were supposed to matter. The Thursday Caius had stayed for dinner, and they had cooked together in her kitchen. Not well, because neither of them was a particularly accomplished cook, but with the cooperative good humor of two people who were comfortable enough together to make a mess and find it funny. And Birch had positioned himself at the exact midpoint between the stove and the table, covering both potential food sources with maximum efficiency. The Sunday call when she had told him about the advocate position and what it meant, and he had listened through the whole of it and then said, simply, "I think it is the most natural thing I have ever heard," and she had understood that he meant it, and that it was true, and that the thing she had built from the hardest years of her life was exactly what she was supposed to do with it. She wrote about Petra, who had started seeing the man she had been uncertain about, and had arrived at the conclusion that he was, in fact, very good. She wrote about Nina's promotion, which had happened in the summer, and which Nina had announced with a characteristic combination of genuine excitement and immediate concern about what Halford was going to do without her management of his schedule. She wrote about Dr. Voss, who had told her, in the last session of the year, that she thought they had reached the natural end of what their sessions needed to be, and that this was not an ending but a shift, that she was welcome back whenever she wanted, and that what she had done in the years of their work together was exactly what healing was supposed to look like, which was hard and nonlinear, and arrived at by showing up. She wrote about showing up. She had become, she thought, a person who showed up. Not perfectly, and not without difficulty. Not without the occasional Tuesday when the tide pulled back and the weight was present, and the work of getting up and going in was something she did by will rather than by ease. Not without the Sunday calls when she needed to say something hard and chose to say it anyway, because the alternative was the old habit of not saying it, and she was not going back to that. But she showed up. For the archive and the liaison office and the advocate position on the committee that was still in its first year and already more necessary than anyone had quite predicted. For Petra and Nina and Dr. Voss. For Birch, who had never once, in all the time she had known him, failed to show up for her. For Caius, who showed up in a way that was different from everyone else because it asked something different of her, not just to be present, but to be known, which was harder and more valuable, and something she was learning to let herself be. She showed up for herself. That one was the hardest, and also, in the end, the most important. She kept the green notebook. She kept it the way she kept everything, carefully, thoroughly, with the understanding that a record was not just documentation, but intention. The intention to remember, the intention to value, the intention to know, when you looked back, that the things that had mattered had been treated as though they mattered. She was not going to look back and find a locked folder. She was going to look back and find a green notebook, full to the margins, in her own handwriting, the record of a life that had been hard, and had become good, and had been kept the whole way through. She had always believed that records mattered. She was right. She had always believed that the truth, kept long enough, and carefully enough, found someone willing to receive it. She was right about that too. And she had always believed, in the quietest and most stubborn part of herself, that the life on the other side of the hardest years was going to be worth having. She was right. It was. There was a day, sometime in the second winter after the convergence, when Mara woke up and did not think about it first. She had been waiting for this. Not anxiously, she had stopped being anxious about the progress of her own recovery, which Dr. Voss had told her would happen eventually, and which had taken longer than she would have liked, and less long than she had feared. She had been waiting for it, the way you waited for a shift in season, knowing it was coming, knowing you would recognize it when it arrived. She woke up. She heard the rain against the window. She felt Birch rearrange himself at the foot of the bed, with the decisive, comfortable certainty of an animal who had decided where he slept and was not reconsidering. She lay in the gray morning for a few minutes, in the warm, particular quiet of a house that was hers, with an animal who was hers, and then she thought about the day ahead, the archive, the advocate committee meeting at 2, the call with Nina at 5, and only then, in the order of the day assembling itself in her mind, did she think about everything that had led to this. Not as weight, not as the first thing, as something that had happened and had been documented and had been resolved and had led here and was part of the record of who she was. She got up. She made tea. She stood at the kitchen window with the cup in both hands and looked at the rain-gray street below and thought, this is what the other side looks like. She had wondered, through the 2 years of managing, what the other side looked like. She had kept writing because she had believed it existed, not because she could see it clearly. She had kept going to work and keeping the document and eating enough and seeing Dr. Voss and not becoming the version of herself that stopped doing those things, because she had understood, even in the worst of it, that the version of herself that stopped doing things was not a version she could afford to become. She had been right. The other side looked like rain on a window on a Wednesday morning, and a dog at the foot of the bed, and a cup of tea in both hands, and a day full of things she had chosen. It looked like ordinary. It looked like completely, specifically, wonderfully ordinary. She drank the tea. She put the cup in the sink, not the rack, the sink, because Petra had been right that the single cup on the drying rack was a statement, and she was making a different statement now. She got dressed. She clipped Birch's lead to his collar, and they went out into the rain. She walked her usual route. The park, the long loop, the bench by the bridge where the man with the coffee and the book sat in better weather, and which was empty now, the rain making small, quick circles on the river. She walked with her chin up and her hands in her pockets and let the rain be cold on her face, which she had always liked, and which she had denied herself for a while, because small pleasures required a certain tolerance for the present, and her tolerance had been very thin. Her tolerance now was good. She was building it up the way you built anything up, deliberately, with attention, with the understanding that the practice of tolerating good things was exactly that, a practice. She went to the archive. She went to the committee meeting at 2. She called Nina at 5. She made soup for dinner and ate all of it, and gave Birch the approved amount of bread, which was 1 piece, not the 3 he made a credible case for. She wrote in the green notebook. She wrote, "Today I woke up, and it was the second thing, not the first. I think that is what they mean when they say healed, not gone, not erased, just not the first thing anymore." She closed the notebook. She looked at her apartment, the lights on the windowsill that she had kept up past winter because she liked them, the book on the table that was on page 212 because she had been reading it properly, the photograph on the shelf that Nina had sent from her phone of the 2 of them at the market last spring, which Mara had printed and framed because it was good, and because she had decided she was allowed to have good things on her shelf. Birch was on the sofa. The rain was on the window. She called Caius. He answered immediately. "Good evening," he said. "Good evening," she said. "How was the committee meeting?" "Productive," she said. "We approved the updated case intake form. Dara presented the first-year statistics. What did they show?" 43% increase in completed reviews, she said, across all 5 territories. In the first year of the new protocol. A brief pause. 43%, he said. 43%, she said. There was a quiet between them that contained that number, and what it meant, and where it had come from. "Mara," he said. "Yes. I need to tell you something," he said. "And I want to tell you on a Sunday call, properly, not tonight, but I also cannot wait until Sunday." She sat up slightly. "I have been offered," he said, "a formal nomination for a second term. The council voted last week. I said I would give them my answer by the end of the month. She was quiet for a moment. And? She said. And I want to take it, he said. But I want you to know, before I give them the answer, that I want to take it because I think there is more to do, and not because it is easier than thinking about what comes after. I have been doing this for 9 years. I am going to do it for another term, and at the end of that term, I am going to want a different kind of life. She looked at the lights on the windowsill. What kind of life? She said. One with more Thursdays, he said. More reading rooms. More of you. In every practical sense that more of you can mean, without the schedule and the territories, and the distance between all of it. A pause. I am not asking you anything specific right now. I am telling you the shape of what I want, so that you can decide what you want the shape of yours to be. She sat with the phone in her hand, and the rain on the window, and the lights along the sill. She thought about a woman who had once closed all the doors and stayed very still inside a small, managed life, and called it enough. She thought about what enough meant now. I want more Thursdays too, she said. I want more of everything. I am learning to want things without being afraid of them. I know, he said. I can see it. Tell me when you give them the answer, she said. You will be the first to know, he said. Good, she said. Now go to bed. You have the Eastern Territory session tomorrow. I know, he said. Good night, Mara Elliott. Good night, she said. She put the phone down. She looked at her apartment for a moment, the lights, the book, the photograph, Birch on the sofa. Then she opened the green notebook. She wrote, Today I thought about the future, and it did not frighten me. I thought about more of everything, and I felt ready. She closed the notebook. She turned out the lights. She slept well, in the warm and quiet of a house that was hers, with a dog at the foot of her bed, headed toward a future she was ready to keep. The record was open. It was full of good things. She was still writing.